The desert has a way of holding its breath. By day it scorches with relentless fire, its sands shifting and glittering like waves of a golden ocean. But by night, it transforms into something altogether different, a realm of shadows and silence, where the heat subsides, and the sky reveals a tapestry of stars so vast it seems to swallow the earth. In this stillness, on the plateau of Giza, the monuments of ancient Egypt rise in spectral dignity. The pyramids stand like titans frozen in stone, their edges softened by the passing of time, their secrets swallowed in layers of dust. And before them, at the threshold of myth and memory, sits the Sphinx. The Sphinx does not move, does not speak, yet it commands. Its lion's body crouches in eternal vigilance. Its human face gazes forward into eternity, and its presence feels less like a monument and more like a living sentinel carved to guard something unspeakably important. The longer one stares, the more unsettling it becomes. Its eyes, worn yet unbroken, seem fixed not on the horizon but on something hidden, as though it remembers what the world has forgotten. For thousands of years, it has watched as empires rose and fell, as kings and conquerors claimed the land, as explorers and tourists wandered in awe at its feet. And through it all, the Sphinx has remained silent. A silence not of absence but of intention, a silence that feels almost protective. For centuries, whispers have followed this silence. Stories passed through markets, temples, and palaces. Rumors that beneath the Sphinx lies more than just earth and stone. Some speak of hidden chambers, carved long before the known history of Egypt. Others suggest labyrinths stretching deep into the plateau, guarded passages leading to treasures of unimaginable value, or perhaps libraries filled with knowledge lost to humanity. The notion is intoxicating, that under one of the world's most iconic monuments might rest not simply relics of a glorious civilization, but truths that reach back into an age even older than Egypt itself. Archaeologists have long tried to strip these tales of their mystery. Official records tell us the Sphinx was a creation of the 4th dynasty, sculpted from limestone around 2500 BCE, a companion to the Pyramid of Khafra. Yet cracks appear in this narrative. Weathering patterns hint at water erosion from rains that may have fallen thousands of years before Egypt's desert age. Ancient texts speak in riddles about hidden places beneath the paws of the great beast. Even modern scientific surveys, using ground-penetrating radar, have hinted at voids and anomalies beneath its body, spaces where there should be only solid stone. And yet, whenever these discoveries arise, they seem to be swiftly explained, away dismissed, or quietly filed out of public attention. Why? This is where the tension begins to rise. If there is truly nothing beneath the Sphinx, why the silence, the censorship, the guarded secrecy? Why are certain surveys withheld, certain excavations halted, certain questions deflected with almost defensive force? Could it be that the Sphinx is guarding not simply the tombs of pharaohs, but something far more dangerous, something that those in power believe humanity is not ready to face? The desert is full of graves, but it is also full of buried truths. Civilizations have always had reasons to conceal what they knew. Some knowledge may have been considered sacred, too precious for the profane eyes of outsiders. Some may have been dangerous, capable of unbalancing order or revealing truths that undermine authority. And some may have been so far ahead of their time that to reveal it would only have brought fear, persecution, or destruction. Which of these is buried beneath the Sphinx, if any? Or is it all of them at once? To stand before the Sphinx in the dead of night, when the wind moves softly across the plateau, is to feel the weight of these questions. The sand crunches faintly underfoot, the air is cool, and the massive stone body rises against the star-drenched sky. In that moment, the boundary between past and present blurs. You are not a tourist or a scholar. You are a witness, standing in the same silence that ancient priests once knew, that conquerors once feared, that dreamers once tried to pierce. You cannot help but wonder, what has been hidden here? And more importantly, why? The Sphinx's silence is not empty. It is the silence of a story deliberately withheld, a mystery wrapped in stone. Every civilization buries its secrets, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. Legends survive. Whispers persist. And from time to time discoveries rise, fragments of evidence, anomalies in the rock, unexplained passages in old texts, only to be silenced again by official denial. The pattern repeats itself with unnerving precision. Discovery, excitement, then swift dismissal. Is this coincidence, or is there an invisible hand shaping what the world is allowed to know? And so the questions grow heavier, darker. What if what lies beneath the Sphinx is not simply history, but revelation? What if the chambers said to rest there contain not just artifacts, but knowledge so disruptive it could rewrite the story of humanity? Imagine for a moment that beneath its pores lies proof that Egypt was not the first civilization here, that something far older built the foundations upon which pharaohs later stood. Or perhaps writings, technology, or relics that would suggest human beings were guided by forces, divine, alien, or otherwise, that our history books dare not acknowledge. Knowledge like this would not only challenge archaeology, but religion, politics, and the very foundations of identity. Is this why silence has surrounded the Sphinx for centuries? Is this why so much effort seems to be spent not in uncovering, but in concealing? If knowledge is power, then forbidden knowledge is the most dangerous power of all. And the Sphinx, perhaps, is less a monument to glory than a warning, a stone riddle carved across millennia to tell us, you may look, but you may not enter. As the introduction unfolds, we are left with a haunting sense of anticipation. The desert hides its secrets well, but secrets have a way of calling to us. They linger like a whisper at the edge of hearing, beckoning us closer. The Sphinx is not simply a statue, it is a question written in stone, towering in silence, waiting for us to ask not only what lies beneath, but why we were never meant to know. And with that question our journey begins, a descent into the forbidden chambers of history, the excavations that sparked wonder and controversy, and the long trail of mysteries that officials, governments, and even scholars have kept sealed. What was found beneath the Sphinx has been classified ever since, and now we step closer to uncovering why. The Sphinx is more than stone. To stand before it is to feel the weight of something older than memory, deeper than history. Its body, carved from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, stretches 73 meters in length, its paws outstretched, as if eternally poised to rise. Its height, towering over 20 meters, presses down on those who approach, not with menace but with authority. And yet, for all its size, for all its mass, it is the face, and the enigmatic human face rising from the body of a lion, that arrests the soul. It stares forward with a gaze that has not blinked for nearly 5,000 years. No matter where you stand before the Sphinx, its eyes seem fixed ahead, gazing beyond the horizon, through centuries, through empires, through time itself. Travelers have long written of the uncanny sensation it gives, that one is being watched, measured, weighed. To the uninitiated it may appear lifeless, worn, eroded, but those who linger beneath its shadow often confess to a strange feeling, that the Sphinx is awake, even if it does not move. Its silence is not emptiness. It is a silence that holds back answers, a silence that dares you to ask questions you may not be ready to hear. The origins of the Sphinx are, in official terms, relatively simple. According to mainstream Egyptology, it was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE, as a guardian figure aligned with his pyramid. The lion's body symbolized power, protection, and kingship. The human head, believed by many to be a likeness of Khafre himself, was meant to immortalize his rule in stone. Yet almost from the beginning, the story was not so neat. The Sphinx does not fit cleanly into history's boxes. Its construction techniques remain debated. Its alignment with celestial bodies hints at a deeper purpose, and its weathering, some argue, tells a story far older than Khafre, a story stretching back to an age when rains, not sandstorms, swept the plateau. To the Greeks who came centuries later, the Sphinx was not simply Egyptian. It became a figure of riddles and terror. Their Sphinx was a creature of myth, a winged lion with a woman's face, who sat upon a rock outside Thebes and posed her. Famous riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 in the evening? The hero Oedipus answered correctly, and the Sphinx destroyed herself. But where had this myth originated? Why had the Greeks, gazing upon the statue at Giza, felt compelled to cast it into their own stories as a keeper of secrets and riddles? Was it mere cultural borrowing, or did they sense, as countless others have sensed, that the real Sphinx itself posed a question, one carved not in words, but in stone? The Arab chroniclers of later centuries brought their own visions. To them, the Sphinx was Abu al-Hol, the father of terror. Some saw it as a talisman of ancient kings, built to protect hidden chambers filled with treasures and scrolls. Others whispered that it was a sentinel guarding forbidden knowledge left by civilizations that existed before the Great Flood. The medieval historian al-Makrizi wrote that inside the plateau of Giza were vaults of books, sciences, and secrets, from before the time of Noah, sealed away until mankind was ready. Whether legend or memory, the persistence of this idea, that beneath the Sphinx lay something greater than itself, could never be silenced. Perhaps this is why the Sphinx has never loosened its grip on human imagination. It is not merely its scale, though its vastness is undeniable. It is not merely its artistry, though its design is elegant in its fusion of man and beast. It is the feeling that it hides something, that its gaze, unblinking, eternal, is directed not outward but inward, guarding what rests beneath. To look into its face is to confront the possibility that history is incomplete, that what we are told about the past is only the surface of a deeper ocean. Even the damage upon its body seems to add to its mystery. Its nose is famously absent, sheared away by time, conquest, or deliberate destruction. Its headdress is battered, its body eroded, its pores repaired and patched across centuries, yet its face still holds power. Napoleon's soldiers were said to have stood in awe before it. Travelers in the 19th century, arriving by camel and caravan, often described the surreal moment of first sighting the Sphinx rising from the dunes, half buried in sand. At times, only its head and neck were visible above the desert, as though it were drowning in the earth it was meant to command. It seemed to sleep beneath the sands, waiting to be uncovered, waiting for the right question to be asked. This image of burial and reawakening has always defined the Sphinx. For much of its history, it was submerged in the desert, its body hidden under drifting dunes. Pharaohs attempted restorations. Thutmose IV, in the 15th century BCE, claimed that the Sphinx had spoken to him in a dream, promising him kingship if he would clear away the sand. He obeyed, and upon ascending the throne he erected the dream stele between its paws, a carved stone tablet that still stands today, telling of this divine encounter. In this story, the Sphinx itself was alive, speaking across the veil of sleep, offering prophecy and power. What other monument on earth is said to have whispered destiny to a king? Later rulers too would attempt to preserve it, but the sands always returned. For centuries at a time, the Sphinx was little more than a mound with a face peeking above. Travelers wrote of it as a strange half-buried giant, a relic of forgotten gods. And when the desert finally receded, when excavators clawed the sands, away they found its body scarred with deep fissures, fissures that some argued could only have been made by rainfall, long before Egypt became desert. Could it be that the Sphinx was older than the pyramids themselves? Could it belong not to Khafra, but to an age erased from official memory? The more one peers into the Sphinx's gaze, the more questions emerge. Its face, though often assumed to be Khafra, is not universally agreed upon. Its proportions do not match the known statues of the pharaoh. Some even claim the head is too small for the body, suggesting that it was recarved from an older figure, perhaps a lion, into a pharaoh's likeness. If true, this would mean the Sphinx predates Khafra and was merely adopted, altered, and claimed by his reign. What secrets did it embody before it wore the crown of Egypt? It is no wonder that mystics, poets, and seekers across the centuries have been drawn to the Sphinx. It is more than an archaeological artifact. It is a mirror. To some it reflects the power of kingship, to others the terror of riddles, to others still it is a sentinel guarding forgotten truths, and always it stares forward unblinking, as though it knows something it will never say. The first modern excavations of the Sphinx only deepened the mystery. In the 19th century, explorers and scholars began digging away the sands once more, exposing its pores and body in their full magnitude. Reports trickled out of hidden chambers beneath, of hollow sounds when the stone was struck, of shafts leading down into the bedrock. These whispers fueled speculation that something indeed lay beneath the pores. Some said it was a tomb. Others said it was a library, the fabled Hall of Records, said by ancient lore to contain the knowledge of a lost civilization, perhaps Atlantis itself. Whatever the truth, officials grew cautious, and many of these reports seemed to vanish from public view as swiftly as they appeared. And so the cycle continued. Awe, discovery, rumor, suppression. The Sphinx's gaze never blinked, and humanity never ceased trying to read its silence. Legends became entangled with archaeology, and archaeology became entangled with secrecy. Each excavation promised revelation, yet each ended with more questions. The Sphinx remains what it has always been, a riddle in stone. It does not answer, but it does not need to. Its power lies in its silence, its ability to stir questions that dig deeper than sand or stone. To stand before it is to feel both reverence and unease, reverence for the civilization that created it, unease for the truths it may still conceal. It is not only a guardian of the plateau, it is a guardian of imagination, forever provoking us to wonder what lies beyond the reach of history. As the first excavations gave way to more systematic studies in the modern era, rumors of anomalies beneath the Sphinx only multiplied. Strange voids detected by instruments, hidden passages hinted at by ancient texts, and accounts of discoveries swiftly silenced. The gaze of the Sphinx never wavered. What did it see? What was it guarding? This is where our journey begins to deepen, for if the Sphinx is the riddle, the excavations are the attempt at an answer. But answers, like sand, have a way of slipping through fingers. The more is uncovered, the more remains hidden, and beneath the pores of the Sphinx the story was only beginning. The 19th century was an age of rediscovery. Empires stretched across continents, steamships carried explorers where caravans once toiled, and Europe turned its gaze toward the ancient world with an obsession bordering on fever. Egypt, with its pyramids and temples rising from the desert like monuments out of myth, became a crucible for that obsession. And among all its wonders, none held greater allure than the Sphinx, half-buried, enigmatic, and waiting. When the French campaign under Napoleon marched into Egypt in 1798, soldiers stood astonished before the colossal head protruding from the sands. For many of them, it was the first time Europe had seen the Sphinx up close in centuries. Artists and scholars, part of Napoleon's entourage, sketched feverishly, recording not only the monument's features but its condition. At the time, most of its body remained submerged, its pores completely swallowed by the desert. Only the weathered head and neck rose above, a giant seeming to drown in the golden tide. Even then soldiers whispered that the statue might be hollow, that beneath its stern face were secrets yet unrevealed. The great age of excavation soon followed. By the early 1800s, Western travelers and archaeologists were competing to clear the sands from Egypt's antiquities. Some were scholars, others were treasure hunters masquerading as gentlemen explorers. Their methods were crude, often little, more than brute shoveling. But when it came to the Sphinx, ambition grew. To free its body from the desert was no small task. Decades would pass before the monument was fully revealed. In the meantime, each partial excavation brought with it not only discovery but rumor, whispers that what lay beneath the pores of the Sphinx was more than stone. The first serious attempt at clearing the Sphinx came in 1817, led by the Italian explorer Giovanni Battista Caviglia. Caviglia had already dug at the Great Pyramid, seeking hidden passages and chambers, but the Sphinx captured his imagination. With teams of local workers, he removed thousands of tons of sand, gradually exposing the massive forepores and chest. The sight was overwhelming for those present, the Sphinx's body emerging after perhaps centuries of burial, its proportions dwarfing anything previously imagined. Yet Caviglia reported something stranger. When his men struck certain parts of the body with tools, the sound that echoed back was not solid. Some areas seemed to ring hollow, as though voids lay within or beneath. Caviglia, like many of his era, was inclined toward speculation. He wrote of the possibility of chambers under the monument, perhaps passages leading into the bedrock of the plateau. These writings, though dismissed by some as fanciful, sparked fascination across Europe. The Sphinx was no longer simply a sculpture. It was a riddle concealing something beneath its pores. But before Caviglia could pursue his investigations, the sands returned. The desert swallowed the excavation once more, erasing his progress almost as quickly as he had achieved it. Whispers, however, cannot be buried. Other explorers followed, each uncovering fragments of the Sphinx's body, each reporting strange echoes and anomalies. In the mid-19th century, Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist and founder of the Egyptian Antiquities Service, attempted further clearances. Mariette was more cautious in his claims, focused on preservation rather than myth, yet even his efforts gave rise to rumor. Workers spoke of cavities, of unexpected hollows beneath the pores, and of officials quickly dismissing the reports. The more sand was removed, the louder the whispers became. By the late 19th century, the fascination had deepened into obsession. The British and the French competed for influence in Egypt, and with them came expeditions, surveys, and funding. Travelers' journals and local newspapers began to publish accounts of the Sphinx as not merely a monument, but a sentinel. Legends circulated of hidden chambers stretching from its pores toward the pyramids, of treasures sealed away in subterranean halls, of libraries containing the knowledge of lost civilizations. And always, alongside these rumors, were sudden denials. Officials would announce that no chambers existed, that reports of hollow sounds were exaggerated, that excavators had been mistaken. The tone was defensive, hurried. Each denial only sharpened curiosity. In 1853, an excavation cleared enough sand for a German explorer, Carl Richard Lepsius, to describe the Sphinx's body in more detail than ever before. He too remarked on its weathering, noting the deep fissures and erosion marks. But among his team, whispers persisted, that vibrations carried strangely when striking the base, that certain points echoed like drums. Such anomalies were never published formally, left instead to linger in letters, diaries, and conversations. A pattern was forming. Public records showed careful descriptions of measurements and hieroglyphs, while private correspondence hinted at something stranger, something deliberately excluded. At the dawn of the 20th century, the excavations grew more ambitious. By then, technology had advanced, and archaeological societies had greater resources. Between 1925 and 1936, the French engineer Émile Barrès undertook one of the most extensive excavations of the Sphinx ever attempted. For 11 years, his team labored to remove the desert sands, finally exposing the Sphinx's body in its entirety. Photographs from this period remain some of the most iconic images of the monument. Its full form revealed colossal and awe-inspiring. But it was also during Barrés's work that the rumors reached their most intense pitch. Workers spoke of hollow spaces beneath the pores. Some claimed that while clearing the sand, they encountered openings or fissures leading downwards. Others reported that surveys suggested cavities within the bedrock, extending under the monument itself. Barrés's official reports were strangely silent on these points. He acknowledged repairs, fissures, and restoration efforts, but nowhere did he confirm or deny the existence of chambers. Yet local accounts told another story. It was said that some excavations were abruptly halted, as though orders had come from above to leave certain areas untouched. Why, if nothing lay beneath, would so much effort be made to silence the possibility? This pattern of discovery and denial fed into a growing sense of cover-up. By the 1930s, whispers of a hidden hall of records beneath the Sphinx were gaining traction. The idea was rooted in ancient lore, legends that the Sphinx guarded vaults of knowledge from a time before Egypt itself, perhaps from a lost civilization. Some linked it to Plato's Atlantis, others to pre-dynastic kings said to have reigned before the Great Flood. These tales, once confined to esoteric circles, now spread into the public imagination, fueled by the strange silences in official reports. Newspapers of the era occasionally hinted at suppressed findings. In Cairo, rumors circulated of foreign archaeologists who had discovered shafts or chambers but were forced to cover them again under the supervision of authorities. Some claimed artifacts were removed in secret, their existence denied. Each rumor was impossible to prove, yet each left its mark. The Sphinx, already a riddle, was becoming a nexus of conspiracy. The atmosphere around the Sphinx in the early 20th century was unlike that of other monuments. At the pyramids, excavations uncovered tombs, temples, and artifacts with relative transparency. At the Sphinx, however, the narrative was different. It seemed to resist revelation. Each time its body was exposed, the sands eventually reclaimed it. Each time rumors of chambers emerged, officials denied them. Each time tools struck hollow echoes, the sound was buried beneath silence. It was as if the monument itself was conspiring to keep its secrets intact. By the late 1930s, scientific surveys began to supplement traditional excavation. Early ground testing and structural studies were attempted, though the methods were primitive compared to what would come later. Still, even these crude techniques suggested anomalies beneath the surface. Reports spoke of unexplained voids or areas of unusual resonance. Once more, the results were quietly set aside. Once more, the official story remained. The Sphinx was solid stone, nothing more. But the whispers did not fade. If anything, they grew stronger in the silence left behind. To travelers and seekers, the very act of denial became proof of something hidden. Why deny so vehemently unless there was truth to conceal? Why silence rumors unless they threatened a deeper revelation? And so, as the sands shifted, and the Sphinx looked on with its eternal gaze, the stage was set for a new era, the era of modern science, with instruments capable of probing the bedrock, of confirming or denying once and for all the existence of what lay beneath. Yet even then, as the 20th century advanced, one thing remained unchanged. The Sphinx continued to whisper through the sand, not with words, but with questions. Each excavation, each denial, each rumor was another echo in the hollow spaces of history. And the gaze that never blinked seemed almost to smile, as if it knew that the riddle was far from solved. By the middle of the 20th century, the Sphinx had already endured a century and a half of excavation, restoration, and speculation. Sand had been cleared, its massive body revealed, and its image cemented as the very symbol of ancient Egypt. Yet for all that had been accomplished, one of the oldest questions remained unanswered. What lay beneath? For decades, this question lingered in the background of Egyptology, dismissed by many scholars as nothing more than folklore, yet never entirely forgotten. By the 1970s, a new set of tools, seismographs, sonar, and eventually ground-penetrating radar, gave investigators the means to probe the Earth without digging. What had once been a matter of rumor could now, at least in theory, be tested scientifically. And so began a new phase in the story of the Sphinx, one where hard data seemed to confirm what whispers in the sand had suggested for centuries, that beneath the stone colossus, something hollow might be waiting. The first seismic studies at Giza were not designed to hunt for hidden chambers. Conducted in the late 1970s by teams of geophysicists, their aim was practical: to assess the stability of the bedrock around the Sphinx, which was threatened by erosion, groundwater, and centuries of wear. Yet as instruments were placed near the Sphinx's paws and flanks, anomalies appeared. Seismic waves sent pulsing into the earth did not behave as expected. Instead of returning consistent echoes from solid limestone, the signals scattered, slowed, and sometimes failed to return at all. To those trained in geophysics, the meaning was clear. The subsurface beneath the Sphinx was not uniform. There were voids, cavities of some kind, interrupting the stone. At first, such anomalies were cautiously reported as areas of low density or zones of possible subsurface disturbance. The language was technical, deliberately restrained. No one wanted to spark sensational headlines about secret chambers under the Sphinx. Yet the more the data was analyzed, the harder it became to ignore the implications. One study suggested a rectangular cavity beneath the monument's left paw. Another hinted at an elongated void stretching under its body. The shapes were too regular, too geometric, to be dismissed as mere natural fractures. Something deliberate seemed to have been carved or left within the bedrock. In the 1980s, as ground-penetrating radar, GPR, became more widely available, researchers returned to Giza armed with even more sophisticated instruments. Unlike seismic testing, which relied on sound waves, GPR could send bursts of electromagnetic energy into the ground, mapping variations in density and composition. When applied near the Sphinx, the results were startling. Several independent teams reported rectangular anomalies directly beneath the monument. The data suggested chambers measuring several meters in length and depth, arranged in patterns that seemed anything but accidental. The discoveries should have been a breakthrough, but instead they became a point of quiet contention. Official statements from Egyptian authorities downplayed the findings, suggesting that the anomalies were natural fissures or erosion channels. Reports were filed away, references kept vague, and the subject gently deflected whenever raised in public. Scholars who spoke too eagerly about chambers beneath the Sphinx found themselves sidelined, their access to excavation permits curtailed. The official narrative remained firm. The Sphinx was a monolithic statue carved from solid bedrock, nothing more. Yet the data stubbornly suggested otherwise. Why then the hesitation? Part of the answer lies in the politics of archaeology. By the late 20th century, Egypt's monuments had become not only cultural treasures, but also powerful symbols of national identity. To suggest that something entirely new, something capable of rewriting the narrative of Egyptian history, might lie beneath the Sphinx was to invite controversy, sensationalism, and perhaps even chaos. Egyptian authorities had long grown wary of Western explorers, who framed discoveries in ways that fed myths of lost civilizations at the expense of Egypt's own heritage. To admit to hidden chambers risked fueling theories that the Sphinx was not Egyptian at all, but the remnant of an older, forgotten world. Indeed, such theories already swirled. Esoteric writers and alternative historians seized upon the seismic and radar data as proof of their claims. Some insisted that the Sphinx was far older than dynastic Egypt, built not in the time of Pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE, but in some distant epoch, perhaps 10,000 or even 12,000 years ago. They pointed to weathering patterns on the monuments, flanks, which some geologists argued were consistent with heavy rainfall rather than desert winds. Evidence, they said, that the Sphinx had stood through a wetter climate long before the rise of the pharaohs. If chambers truly lay beneath, these theorists argued, perhaps they contained the fabled Hall of Records, a library of lost knowledge from Atlantis or some other vanished civilization. The Egyptian Antiquities Organization, later the Supreme Council of Antiquities, viewed such claims with suspicion. For them to concede even the possibility of man-made cavities beneath the Sphinx was to open the door to pseudoscience. And so the official response hardened. Anomalies were natural. No hidden halls, no lost libraries. The Sphinx was remarkable. Enough without dragging Atlantis into the story. Yet the instruments kept whispering otherwise. One of the most famous studies came in 1991, when a joint team from the United States and Egypt conducted seismic surveys around the Sphinx. The results, published in technical reports, described subsurface anomalies consistent with chambers, both beneath the monument's forepaws and extending along its body. A particularly striking discovery was a rectangular cavity directly beneath, the left paw measuring several meters across. Its geometry, the researchers noted, suggested the possibility of artificial origin. The language was cautious, but unmistakable. Something was there. The announcement sparked a storm. Within weeks, newspapers ran sensational headlines about secret rooms under the Sphinx. Television specials speculated about hidden treasures, time capsules, or evidence of civilizations long forgotten. Egyptian authorities caught off. Guards scrambled to control the narrative. Press releases insisted that the cavities were natural fissures. Access to raw data was restricted. And for a time, the subject fell back into obscurity, quietly filed away under unresolved anomalies. But the echoes could not be silenced. Among those who studied the data, unease remained. The cavities were too regular, the signals too consistent. If they were merely geological, why the reluctance to investigate further? Why not drill a simple borehole to confirm? Official answers spoke of conservation, of protecting the monument from damage. Yet to many, the caution seemed excessive. It was as if some truths were deemed too dangerous or too disruptive to confront directly. The 1990s saw further attempts at clarification. Ground-penetrating radar sweeps conducted by Japanese teams revealed additional anomalies near the Sphinx's flanks and extending toward the Great Pyramid. Some data hinted at linear corridors, as though pathways once connected the monuments, beneath the plateau. Again, the findings were reported in technical papers, but swiftly minimized in public statements. The pattern was familiar: discovery followed by dismissal, evidence followed by denial. The Sphinx kept its secrets, or rather, those secrets were kept for it. Behind the scientific caution lay a deeper unease, one that transcended archaeology. If chambers truly existed beneath the Sphinx, what might they contain? The possibility was not merely academic. A discovery of that magnitude could destabilize centuries of historical consensus, rewriting the story of Egypt and perhaps human civilization itself. Would the world be ready to accept that our oldest narratives were incomplete? Would nations, institutions and religions built upon certain timelines be willing to confront evidence of forgotten epochs? For some, it seemed safer to leave the question unanswered, to allow the echoes beneath stone to remain echoes only. And yet the allure persisted. Even in their restrained language, the seismic reports carried a sense of wonder. Beneath one of humanity's most iconic monuments, the earth did not behave as expected. Something interrupted the stone, something hollow, something that seemed to wait. Whether natural fissure, ancient chamber, or forgotten tomb, the voids beneath the Sphinx remained tantalizing, unresolved and quietly haunting. By the end of the 20th century, the debate had settled into an uneasy stalemate. Official archaeology maintained that no hidden structures existed, while alternative researchers insisted that the evidence said otherwise. Between them lay the raw data, seismic readings, radar charts, geophysical maps, lines of evidence that neither camp could fully dismiss. The Sphinx endured, its gaze unblinking, its silence unbroken, while beneath it, the ground still carried whispers that science itself had recorded but not yet explained. It is here that the story takes on its most unsettling dimension. For if the anomalies beneath the Sphinx are real, and the data suggests they are, then someone, at some time in the distant past, carved chambers into the bedrock. Who, and for, what purpose, remains a question that resonates like the echoes themselves. Were they the work of the pharaohs, preparing symbolic tombs that were later forgotten? Or do they point to something older still, to a culture erased from history, leaving only shadows beneath stone? The Sphinx refuses to answer. The instruments, however, continue to murmur their strange, hollow replies. And so, as the 20th century closed, the mystery deepened rather than resolved. The tools of modern science had, for the first time, pierced the silence of the bedrock. What they found was not certainty but uncertainty magnified. Beneath the pores of the Sphinx, beneath the body that has stared across millennia, the earth still holds its riddles. Whether natural or deliberate, geological or architectural, the cavities remain. The question is no longer whether something is there, but why we are so reluctant to face it. For in those echoes beneath stone lies a truth both scientific and symbolic. Some secrets endure not because they cannot be found, but because humanity may not yet be ready to accept what they reveal. The desert has always been a place where myth and silence blend, where whispers rise from the dunes like ghosts of forgotten ages. Among all the mysteries surrounding the Sphinx, none has captured the imagination of dreamers, seekers, and mystics more than the story of the Hall of Records. It is a tale not of stone, nor of history as carved in textbooks, but of prophecy, a vision of a hidden chamber buried beneath the Sphinx's massive pores, said to contain the entire wisdom of a lost world. And though scholars dismiss it, though officials laugh and archaeologists shake their heads, the idea refuses to die. It lingers like a mirage at the edge of human curiosity. The question is simple, yet monumental. Could it be true? The modern fascination with the Hall of Records begins, curiously, not in Egypt but in America, in the early 20th century. It was here that a man named Edgar Cayce, a humble Kentucky farm boy turned mystic healer, began offering readings under trance. Known later as the Sleeping Prophet, Cayce would close his eyes, drift into a dreamlike state, and speak in a calm, measured voice about topics ranging from health to ancient history to the fate of civilizations. For decades, his words were recorded and transcribed by devoted followers. And within this vast body of trance sessions came a prophecy that electrified the imaginations of those who believed. Cayce claimed that beneath the Sphinx lay a chamber, a great vault of knowledge, sealed by a people from a lost land. This, he said, was the Hall of Records, a library left by the survivors of Atlantis. Cayce's words struck like lightning. Atlantis, that eternal ghost of human memory, first described by Plato as an advanced civilization swallowed by the sea, was already woven deeply into popular imagination. But Cayce gave it geographical and physical anchor. If Atlantis had truly existed, then its survivors had not vanished into myth, but had traveled, carrying their knowledge, and had hidden it beneath the most mysterious monument on Earth, the Sphinx then was not simply a symbol of kingship or the sun, but a guardian of secrets meant for a future age. In the right time, Cayce declared, when humanity is ready, the Hall of Records will be opened. For those who long to believe that human history stretched further back than Egypt, further even than Mesopotamia, this prophecy was irresistible. The Sphinx, already shrouded in mystery, became not only a riddle of stone, but a gateway to another world. Seekers and mystics traveled to Giza, standing at its feet, staring into its eroded face, imagining the scrolls, the crystal tablets, the cosmic diagrams slumbering beneath. Could it be possible that hidden just meters below their feet lay the blueprint of civilization, waiting for the right hands to uncover it? The tone of these dreams was always half mystical, half rebellious, a challenge to the academic gatekeepers who insisted that Egyptian civilization arose in 3100 BCE, full stop. Cayce's followers saw things differently. They believed the Egyptians were inheritors, not inventors. The Hall of Records, if found, would shatter the official timelines, revealing that long before the Nile kings another race had walked the earth, a race that mastered architecture, astronomy, and perhaps even something beyond science as we know. And suddenly, the Sphinx's gaze seemed not only eternal but knowing, as if it watched us, waiting for us to rediscover truths we had buried even from ourselves. For of course archaeologists scoffed. To them, the Sphinx was a masterpiece of Old Kingdom artistry, built under Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. The idea of a hidden Atlantean vault beneath it was fantasy, they said, born of trance babble and pseudo-history. Excavations revealed no grand library. Official surveys declared that what lay beneath the Sphinx was nothing more than solid bedrock. And yet, the denials only seemed to sharpen the fascination. Why, believers asked, did officials always seem so determined to shut down discussion? Why did those who whispered of hollow chambers and strange readings often find themselves ignored, dismissed, or quietly silenced? By the 1970s and 80s, this tension grew stronger. As seismic studies hinted at possible cavities beneath the Sphinx, Cayce's followers grew excited. Were these the chambers he had spoken of? The words of the sleeping prophet seemed to gain eerie weight. Even the timing seemed uncanny. Cayce had predicted that the Hall of Records would be opened between 1996 and 1998. And in those very years, explorations around the Sphinx did indeed intensify, though never with the transparency that the public expected. Cameras were banned from certain digs. Reports went missing. Statements contradicted each other. To the Cayce faithful, this was confirmation, not refutation. Something was there, something powerful enough to keep hidden. But perhaps what makes the Hall of Records so magnetic is not only the prophecy itself, but the way it resonates with an ancient human longing. Across cultures, there are always whispers of lost wisdom. The Vedas of India, said to be eternal, the scrolls of Alexandria burned by fire, the emerald tablets of Hermes hiding cosmic truths. We seem to believe deep down that humanity once knew more than it does now, that we are the children of a forgotten past, groping through the ruins of a once greater age. The Hall of Records is the perfect vessel for this yearning. It represents the hope that somewhere, preserved in stone, lies the ultimate answer, where we came from, what we are, and what we might yet become. And yet, perhaps there is also fear. For if Casey was right, then the knowledge within the Hall of Records is not merely historical. He hinted that it held the records of the beginnings and the endings, truths about cycles of time, destruction, and rebirth. Could it be that the vault beneath the Sphinx tells not only of Atlantis' fall, but of ours? If so, then secrecy would make sense. Knowledge can liberate, but it can also terrify. To open the Hall of Records might be to look into a mirror we are not yet ready to face. The mystics who gather at the Sphinx speak of feeling vibrations in the ground of dreams in which the chamber calls to them. Tourists take photographs of the weathered pores, imagining doorways sealed with limestone. Scholars shake their heads, pointing to lack of evidence, yet even some of them admit to anomalies, fissures that run too neatly, voids that appear on scans but vanish from reports. The Hall of Records remains, in a sense, both real and unreal. Real in the way it inspires, unreal in the way it escapes every attempt at proof. And so the Sphinx watches, as it has for thousands of years, half buried in sand, half revealed to sky, a silent sentinel over secrets we may never touch. Perhaps the Hall of Records is not a literal chamber at all, but a metaphor, a dream planted in human consciousness by Casey's words. Or perhaps it is exactly what he claimed, a vault of crystal and stone, sealed until the stars align and we prove ourselves ready. Either way, the power of the prophecy is undeniable. It has transformed the Sphinx from a riddle of Egypt into a riddle of all humanity. As the chapter closes, we sense both awe and unease. If the Hall of Records exists, why is it hidden? Who decides when humanity is ready? And if officials know more than they admit, what are they protecting us from? The story drifts forward, away from the mystics and into the world of official archaeology, the domain of surveys, excavations, and guarded statements. Yet the prophecy lingers like incense in the air, haunting every denial. For when one stands before the Sphinx at night, with the desert wind whispering through the sands, it is hard not to wonder, is the ground beneath us solid or hollow with secrets? For as long as stories of hidden chambers and lost libraries have hovered over the Giza Plateau, there has been one consistent response from the official guardians of Egyptian history: silence, followed by denial. The Grand Sphinx, with its eroded face and enigmatic body, may whisper to mystics and provoke dreamers, but to Egyptology, or at least to its most public voices, the creature is already solved, its secrets accounted for, its mysteries closed. Yet within this silence, within the firm pronouncements that nothing lies beneath, one can hear a peculiar tension, as if the very insistence of denial is meant to prevent the question from spreading further. The story of the Hall of Records, the seismic anomalies, the whispers of explorers, all of it is dismissed. But the vehemence of the dismissal has, paradoxically, only fueled curiosity. Why, many ask, do the scholars sound so defensive? Why do they refuse to entertain even the possibility? In the mid-20th century, as archaeology professionalized and universities gained control over the narratives of history, Egyptology became increasingly guarded. The days of wild adventurers digging on whims gave way to licensed teams, government oversight, and an emphasis on preserving Egypt's reputation. The Sphinx, as a national symbol, was folded neatly into a story of dynastic progression. Pharaoh Khafre, 4th dynasty, 2500 BCE. Official textbooks explained the monument as a guardian of pyramids, a symbol of power, a religious emblem tied to the sun god Ra. There was no room in this tidy account for Atlantean survivors or secret chambers, and so when questions arose, from fringe theorists, from mystics citing Edgar Casey, from seismic scans suggesting cavities, the scholars closed ranks. To acknowledge the whispers, they believed, would give them legitimacy. Better, then, to pretend such claims were beneath notice. Yet in the 1990s, silence alone was no longer sufficient. Seismic surveys conducted near the Sphinx had hinted at possible anomalies, rectangular voids or cavities that did not match natural fissures. News of these results spread quickly, seized by the press and by followers of Casey's prophecies. Suddenly the words Hall of Records were appearing not in mystical pamphlets, but in mainstream newspapers. And it was here that the official voice of Egyptology took center stage, Dr. Zahi Hawass, who rose to become the most recognizable face of Egyptian antiquities, was charismatic, authoritative, and fiercely protective of Egypt's archaeological heritage. With his wide-brimmed hat and booming voice, he became for many the living embodiment of Egyptian history. But he was also, by necessity or by choice, the gatekeeper. When asked about chambers beneath the Sphinx, Hawass's response was unequivocal: there is nothing there. Every claim of anomalies, he argued, was either a misreading of the data or a deliberate fabrication. The Sphinx, he repeated, sits on solid limestone. There are no hidden vaults, no Atlantean libraries, no forgotten catacombs. It is nonsense, he told journalists. Absolute nonsense. Such firmness might have settled the matter, were it not for the fact that some eyewitnesses told a different story. Engineers who had participated in surveys, scientists who had seen data with their own eyes, whispered later that the anomalies were real, that the ground did not ring solid in all directions. Some claimed that deeper cavities were detected, but the results were hushed, filed away, never fully published. When pressed, authorities either denied the existence of these reports or shifted the narrative, suggesting that even if voids existed, they were natural fissures, meaningless cracks, in the bedrock. But the intensity of denial, the speed with which such conversations were shut down, left many wondering. If there is truly nothing to hide, why the urgency? Why the fear? Here the tension between bureaucracy and imagination sharpens. Egyptologists, trained to protect the academic narrative, saw in these claims not adventure but danger. To admit even the possibility of hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx was to open the floodgates of pseudo-history. If Casey was allowed at the table, then soon would come wild theories of aliens, lost continents, and civilizations predating Egypt by tens of thousands of years. To them, such speculations threatened the credibility of archaeology itself. Better to stamp them out early, to draw the line so firmly that no one could mistake fantasy for fact. In this sense, the silence of scholars was not merely stubbornness but strategy, a defense of their discipline, a wall against chaos. And yet, for the public, the strategy backfired. For every denial from Hawass, for every statement insisting that the bedrock was solid, a counter-story emerged. Eyewitnesses recalled being barred from certain excavation sites. Journalists reported on digs conducted under unusual secrecy, and photographs circulated of tunnels being cleared near the pores of the Sphinx. Whenever questions were asked, official answers seemed strangely rehearsed, even angry. Why so defensive, people wondered. If nothing is there, why not allow independent teams to verify it? The refusal to permit external researchers to explore the anomalies fueled the suspicion that something was indeed being hidden. If not the Hall of Records, then at least something worth keeping out of sight. Zahi Hawass himself became a polarizing figure in this drama. To his supporters, he was a patriot defending Egypt's history from exploitation by outsiders. To his critics, he was an authoritarian gatekeeper, controlling the narrative with an iron hand, more interested in fame and protection of orthodoxy than in truth. Stories circulated of researchers denied permits, of projects abruptly cancelled, of discoveries quietly reclassified or attributed in ways that erased controversy. Hawass's famous temper, his willingness to lash out at journalists and so-called pyramidiates, only deepened the sense of defensiveness. When he insisted again and again that there were no chambers beneath the Sphinx, many listeners heard not confidence but fear. But what if the fear was not of what lay beneath, but of what would happen if the narrative fractured? Egypt's tourism industry rests heavily on the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the image of a proud, continuous civilization stretching back 5,000 years. To suddenly introduce the idea of Atlantean refugees or chambers filled with lost records would not only destabilize academic timelines, but also threaten the authority of Egypt's cultural institutions. To officials, this was not merely an archaeological question, it was political, economic, even existential. The silence of scholars was in this sense a silence born of preservation, of history, of reputation, of control. Still, the contradictions persisted. Visitors reported odd activity at night around the Sphinx enclosure. Workers spoke of being sent into tunnels that were later sealed. Leaked photographs showed door-like shapes beneath the pores, images swiftly, denied by authorities as illusions of shadow. Each denial seemed to breed more questions. Was the government protecting treasures? Or was there truly nothing, and the secrecy only a reflexive defense against conspiracy? Either way, the effect was the same. The official story grew brittle, unable to accommodate the mysteries that clung to the monument. The irony is that by resisting so firmly, Egyptology may have ensured that the myth of the Hall of Records will never die. Had they allowed open exploration, independent verification, and public documentation, perhaps the anomalies would have been explained as geological quirks, nothing more. But the veil of secrecy, the denials delivered with heat rather than calm, created a theatre of suspicion. In this theatre, Hawass became both protagonist and antagonist, the voice of authority, but also the figure against whom mystery seekers projected their doubts. The silence of scholars became paradoxically the loudest echo beneath the Sphinx. And so the story advances. Officialdom insists the bedrock is empty, yet eyewitnesses whisper otherwise. Journalists report contradictions. Mystics declare that Kaysi's prophecy still holds. The truth remains elusive, hidden somewhere between denial and dream. As we move forward, the tension sharpens further, for the more tightly the guardians cling to their silence, the more voices rise to challenge. And in that clash of authority and curiosity, the legend of the Hall of Records does not fade. It grows. It began, as such stories often do, not with an announcement but with a silence. In the late 1990s, as tourists wandered the Giza Plateau and cameras clicked against the golden light of afternoon, whispers spread quietly among guides and workers. Something was happening near the Sphinx. Not a restoration project, not the usual cleaning or reinforcement of ancient stone, but something else. Machinery moved in and out at odd hours. Tents were raised, only to vanish within days. Entire sections of the enclosure were abruptly closed to the public, with guards stationed to wave away the curious. No cameras, no questions, no explanations. The Sphinx sat, as it always had, stoic and inscrutable, but beneath the surface, so the whispers claimed, something had been found. Something that the world was not meant to see. The official explanation was always simple: conservation. The Sphinx, battered by time and weather, required constant care. Blocks needed reinforcement, walls needed shoring. That, visitors were told, was the reason for the sudden fences and closures. Yet those who had watched the plateau for years, archaeologists, local workers, even veteran tour guides, noticed that these conservation efforts had an unusual pattern. The closures always seemed to center not on the most eroded sections of stone, but on very particular areas: the pores, the sides of the enclosure, the bedrock at the creature's base. And the work, whatever it was, often continued at night, when no tourists were around to watch. It was around this time that rumors of secret digs began to multiply. Workers spoke of being hired for short contracts, brought in through side gates, forbidden from carrying phones or cameras. Some described being blindfolded during transport to the worksite so they could not later describe the path they had taken across the plateau. Others said they were paid in cash, dismissed without records, and warned never to speak of what they had seen. A few ignored those warnings. They told stories of tunnels being cleared, of sealed doorways pried open, of chambers filled with stale air that had not been breathed in thousands of years. None of it could be proven, but all of it spread like wildfire through the underground network of Cairo storytellers. The secrecy seemed to thicken in the early 2000s. In 1996, a seismic survey conducted near the Sphinx had already suggested voids beneath the monument, rectangular, geometric, unlikely to be natural. By 1998, word had leaked that a joint team, working under special permits, had begun exploratory digs. Official reports downplayed the results, claiming nothing unusual was found. Yet the timing was peculiar. Multiple areas of the Sphinx enclosure were cordoned off soon after, with scaffolding and equipment hauled in under heavy guard. Tourists who tried to take photographs were stopped by officials. Journalists who asked questions were brushed aside, told the work was routine. But to those who watched closely, the secrecy was too precise, too guarded, too deliberate. Something more than mere preservation was taking place. What fueled the tension was the contradiction. On one hand, Egypt's most public voices, Zahi Hawass foremost among them, declared that there were no hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx. On the other hand, access was restricted with such intensity that it raised more suspicion than reassurance. Why, people asked, would cameras be forbidden at a conservation site? Why were independent archaeologists denied permits to inspect the same areas? Why were excavation plans shifted suddenly, without explanation, as if to misdirect curious eyes? The narrative became cinematic, a stage where the spotlight was turned deliberately away, leaving the shadows to carry their own story. Several accounts emerged from foreign researchers who claimed they had been invited to the plateau in those years, only to find their access revoked at the last moment. They had been promised collaboration, only to be told at the gate that their permits were not valid today. Some spoke of seeing equipment being lowered into shafts, winches, ropes, even portable generators, though when they asked what purpose these served, officials insisted it was nothing more than routine site work. Photographs were confiscated. Interviews were cut short. Reports vanished into archives, never published. What should have been a straightforward archaeological record became instead a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, the gaps filled only by rumor and suspicion. In those years, a recurring motif entered the conversation: the door beneath the Sphinx's paw. In the 1990s, photographs circulated showing a rectangular cut in the bedrock near the monument's right paw. Some insisted it was the entrance to a tunnel, carefully sealed long ago. Officials countered that it was nothing more than a natural fissure or an old restoration shaft, insignificant and empty. Yet the timing was uncanny. Shortly after these images appeared, that very area was closed to the public. Guards were stationed directly beside it. And though official statements described it as ordinary, no one outside the chosen circle of archaeologists was allowed near it again. The secrecy produced a paradox. If, as the authorities insisted, there was nothing beneath the Sphinx, why forbid cameras? Why operate at night? Why change excavation plans without explanation? To believers in the Hall of Records, the answer was obvious. Something had been found. Perhaps not a chamber filled with Atlantean scrolls, but at the very least, a void that confirmed the prophecies were not baseless. To skeptics, the secrecy itself was enough to erode confidence in the official story. Even if nothing extraordinary was hidden, the mere fact that the digs were cloaked in silence made them extraordinary. In the absence of transparency, imagination filled the void. Cinematic tension grew as the story spread beyond Egypt. Western journalists picked up whispers of the forbidden dig, though their reports were often vague, lacking verifiable sources. Television specials hinted at sealed tunnels, cut away before conclusions could be drawn. Online forums swirled with speculation, each retelling adding new layers of intrigue. Ancient archives, hidden treasures, even alien relics. The very lack of evidence became evidence in itself. If nothing exists, one writer asked, why do they work so hard to hide it? What made the tale most compelling was not what was known, but what was denied. Those who had stood on the plateau in the 1990s remembered fences going up, workers entering with equipment, guards enforcing silence. They remembered how quickly certain questions were shut down, how brusquely cameras were turned away. They remembered the atmosphere, tense, watchful, as though the Sphinx itself were not the only thing under guard. This memory, more than any single discovery, became the seed of the conspiracy. The dig, whatever it was, had been real, and the fact that no one was allowed to see it meant it must have mattered. Even decades later, the whispers linger. Ask the right guides in Cairo, and they will tell you that something was found in those years, something that was removed under cover of night. Some claim artifacts were quietly taken to storage, never displayed. Others insist that chambers were entered but sealed again, their contents too destabilizing for the world to see. And always the refrain: no cameras, no witnesses, no record. The dig no one was allowed to see. In the end, what remains is less an answer than a question. A question sharpened by every denial, every confiscated photo, every sudden shift in excavation plans. If the ground beneath the Sphinx truly holds nothing, why surround it with such secrecy? Why forbid the world from looking too closely? Why build a wall of silence so high, unless there is something behind it worth hiding? These questions, unanswered, echo like footsteps in a tunnel, faint, fading, but impossible to ignore, and they lead us onward, deeper into the mystery, toward the next shadow waiting beneath the ancient stone. The Sphinx had always been a riddle in plain sight, its gaze locked on the horizon, its secrets sealed within the limestone bedrock. For centuries, explorers and mystics alike suspected that its true story lay not above, but below. The notion of hidden tunnels and buried chambers running beneath the monument has persisted through history like a shadow, appearing in ancient writings, whispered in local folklore, and resurfacing in the testimonies of modern explorers. Each hint, each fragment of evidence, builds toward a singular possibility: that beneath this monumental guardian lies a network of passageways leading not only under the Sphinx itself, but stretching outward, toward the Great Pyramid, toward history's most enduring mystery, and perhaps toward something the world was never meant to see. Clues first surface in old Arab texts. Chroniclers of the Middle Ages, translating scraps of lore passed through generations, spoke of hidden doors in the Sphinx. Some described an opening concealed between the creature's paws, guarded by centuries of sand and time. Others mentioned secret shafts descending into the rock beneath its body, designed to confound intruders or protect something of immense importance. In the writings of al-Makrizi, a 15th-century Egyptian historian, there is mention of hidden chambers beneath the plateau, sealed long ago by those who feared the knowledge they contained might be lost or misused. These were not casual tales. They carried the cadence of inherited truth, echoes of voices that had walked the plateau long before the modern age. In the 19th century, as European explorers poured into Egypt in their obsessive quest to unravel the mysteries of antiquity, the stories of subterranean passages began to gain new momentum. Some claimed to have seen narrow cuts in the stone near the base of the Sphinx, resembling entrances now sealed with mortar. Others reported peculiar hollows in the bedrock enclosure, which, when tapped with tools, resonated with an odd, echoing quality, as though empty space lurked just beyond the wall. These accounts were written down in journals, published in travelogues, dismissed by some as fanciful exaggerations, but treasured by others as the whispers of truth hiding beneath layers of denial. Then came the era of science. In the 1970s, seismic surveys were conducted around the Sphinx by researchers seeking to understand the stability of its foundation. The results, though technical, sparked intrigue. Several anomalies were detected: rectangular, voids deep beneath the pores and along the body. To those familiar with natural geology, these shapes were puzzling. Nature did not carve neat geometric cavities beneath monuments. These anomalies suggested something else: deliberate excavation, design, architecture hidden under the sand. The reports were cautious, phrased in the language of data, but between the lines lay the unmistakable implication: chambers existed, though no one could say what they held. By the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar further confirmed the suspicions. Scans suggested hollow areas running like veins beneath the plateau, some seemingly aligned toward the Great Pyramid itself. The very idea was staggering. Could it be possible that the Sphinx was not merely a guardian of stone, but a marker, standing sentinel above a buried passageway connecting to the pyramid complex? For archaeologists with a flair for speculation, the thought bordered on an archaeological thriller come to life. What if these tunnels contained caches of papyrus, objects of power, or even the so-called lost Hall of Records whispered of in prophecy? What if the Sphinx was not only a monument to the past, but the entrance to a library of forgotten civilizations? Some explorers claim to have seen the evidence with their own eyes. A few stories tell of small shafts leading into the bedrock, enclosure quickly blocked or sealed after discovery. In one particularly persistent account, workers repairing the Sphinx's flank in the early 20th century stumbled upon a hollow section that rang like a drum when struck. They enlarged a fissure and descended into a narrow corridor. What they found remains a matter of debate. Some insist they encountered a stone-blocked passage that seemed to lead downward toward the heart of the plateau. Others suggest they found nothing but natural cracks. Yet the story refuses to die, for the fissure was promptly resealed and the workers dismissed. The timing again was uncanny. Why seal a natural crack? Why forbid further inspection if nothing was there? The allure of these tunnels is not only the mystery of their architecture, but the possibility of what they might conceal. Ancient Egypt, for all its grandeur, remains an incomplete puzzle. We have scraps of papyrus, fragments of lore, scattered pieces of dynastic memory. But what if beneath the Sphinx, locked away in airtight stone vaults, lie scrolls untouched since before the reign of Khafra, texts that could rewrite everything we believe about history? What if these chambers contain records of pre-dynastic knowledge, astronomical observations, or even artifacts pointing to contact with cultures long thought impossible? To open such a chamber would be to shake the foundations of archaeology itself. Of course, official voices dismiss all of this. Egyptologists insist that the anomalies detected are natural cavities formed by uneven bedrock and erosion. They argue that no ancient texts mention a constructed tunnel network beneath the plateau. They emphasize that excavations, when permitted, have yielded no evidence of such structures. Yet their certainty is not enough to silence the whispers. For every denial there exists an eyewitness who recalls hearing the echo of hollow stone, a photograph showing a suspicious cut in the bedrock, or a rumor of a sealed shaft glimpsed only for a moment before being hidden forever. In an atmosphere thick with secrecy, even the absence of proof becomes a kind of proof. One cannot ignore the recurring suggestion that these tunnels, if they exist, might lead toward the Great Pyramid itself. The alignment of the monuments on the plateau is no accident. The Sphinx faces directly east, aligned with the rising sun on the equinox. The Great Pyramid, only a short distance away, sits on a precisely chosen axis. Could it be that the Sphinx and the pyramid are more than neighbors? That they are connected beneath the ground by a passageway carved in antiquity? The idea electrifies those who chase ancient mysteries. If such a tunnel were ever found, it could mean that the builders of the Giza complex designed the entire plateau as a single interconnected system, guardian above, library below, tomb and monument at its heart. Old Arab texts again lend weight to the speculation. Some describe not only hidden doors, but also long corridors running beneath the desert, stretching like veins between sacred sites. Legends speak of treasures buried for safekeeping, guarded by magical seals and traps to deter the unworthy. These tales may be cloaked in myth, yet beneath the poetry lies a recurring pattern, the belief that what is hidden beneath the earth is as important as what stands above it. To dismiss these stories outright is to ignore the possibility that myth itself may be a vessel of truth, carrying memories across centuries in symbolic form. Modern explorers, both professional and amateur, have long sought to penetrate the mystery. In the late 20th century, a handful of independent researchers claimed to have mapped shafts running beneath the Sphinx enclosure, some pointing suspiciously toward the Great Pyramid. Their findings were dismissed as inconclusive, their access revoked, but the images they shared, grainy, indistinct yet provocative, showed what appeared to be rectangular voids in the bedrock, too precise to be chance. Were these merely illusions of the scan, or the edges of a hidden architecture waiting to be uncovered? The very suggestion of such tunnels raises another question. Why the resistance to exploration? If nothing lies beneath the Sphinx, why forbid independent teams from drilling, scanning, or excavating? Why enforce secrecy with such vigor as was seen in the restricted digs of the 1990s? To conspiracy-minded observers, the answer is simple. Something is there, and it is being protected. Whether that something is a chamber of empty air, A sealed vault of stone or a treasure trove of lost texts, only those with access know the truth. And they are not speaking. The image becomes almost cinematic. Picture it, a narrow passage descending into cool darkness, torches flickering against walls untouched for millennia. Dust motes hang in the still air, disturbed only by the explorer's breath. At the corridor's end, a sealed doorway waits, its edges sharp and deliberate, as if cut yesterday rather than thousands of years ago. Beyond it may lie nothing but more stone, or everything we have ever longed to know. This is the allure of the chambers, the possibility, the promise, the anticipation of revelation. It is an archaeological thriller written not in pages, but in stone and silence. The phrase, chambers of air, chambers of stone, captures this duality. The air chambers are the voids, the anomalies, the unseen spaces that beckon with possibility. The stone chambers are the reality, the weight of geology, the dismissive certainty of those who insist nothing is there. Between the two lies the truth, suspended in tension, waiting for someone bold enough to break the silence. But until that moment comes, the Sphinx continues its vigil, watching the horizon while guarding the secrets beneath. Perhaps the greatest intrigue lies not in what the chambers might contain, but in what they might mean. If scrolls were found, detailing knowledge of the stars beyond anything we credit the ancients with, history itself would bend. If objects of unknown origin were uncovered, civilization's timeline would shatter. If nothing at all were discovered, the myth would endure regardless, for the very act of searching beneath the Sphinx ensures that its mystery is eternal. In this way, the Sphinx becomes not merely a monument of stone, but a living riddle, a threshold between what is known, what is suspected, and what remains forever hidden. And so the whispers continue, the echoes of old texts, the faint hollows in the bedrock, the rumors of sealed doors, all converge into a story that refuses to die. Beneath the Sphinx, there may lie nothing more than sand and stone. Or there may lie a tunnel stretching toward the Great Pyramid, leading into chambers that hold the lost voices of history. Until the day the passage is opened, we will not know, but the possibility alone is enough to keep the world watching, waiting, and wondering. The Sphinx remains silent, yet its silence is louder than words, a riddle that demands pursuit. And, in that pursuit, the line between myth and truth grows ever thinner. Beneath the desert moon, the sands of Giza whisper of secrets far older than kings, dynasties, or even the Sphinx itself. For centuries, legends have circulated that hidden chambers might contain relics capable of rewriting history. But among these legends lies one of the most tantalizing and controversial claims, that objects unearthed beneath or around the Sphinx are not merely relics of ancient Egypt, but artifacts that belong to another time entirely. Objects that seem misplaced, out of sequence, beyond explanation, objects out of time. As whispers from archaeologists, explorers, and even laborers trickled out, stories began to take form. They spoke of metallic containers unearthed in deep shafts, containers whose gleaming surfaces bore no resemblance to the stone, wood, or bronze artifacts typical of dynastic Egypt. Some described them as seamless boxes, others as star charts, engraved into metals that modern science struggles to replicate. No official photographs surfaced. No museum ever displayed them. Instead, the reports dissolved into denial, rumor, and conspiracy. And yet, the whispers persist, as though the desert itself refuses to let silence erase its truths. The first hints of these anomalies emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when early explorers claimed that fragments of odd material were discovered near the pores of the Sphinx. These were not gold nor copper, nor any substance known to the artisans of the Old Kingdom. One particularly unsettling account described a shimmering alloy that reflected starlight in unnatural ways, almost as if it had been forged in the void of space rather than the fires of Earth. Such claims were easy for scholars to dismiss, the product of exaggeration or perhaps the result of modern contamination. And yet, when compared with later accounts, a strange pattern began to take shape. By the 1970s and 1980s, as scientific surveys of the plateau uncovered cavities beneath the Sphinx, reports began to surface of recoveries made quietly, under the cover of night. Workers, bound by silence, whispered that crates were carried away from excavation sites by military trucks, their destinations unknown. Some believed they were taken to Cairo's museums, only to vanish in basements, where the public could never see them. Others suspected that the artifacts traveled farther, across seas into private collections, or into the vaults of governments unwilling to confront their implications. What made these objects so dangerous to the official story? The answer may lie in the possibility that they challenged the timeline of civilization itself. Ancient Egypt, as we are told, arose around 3100 BCE. Its monuments, though majestic, were crafted with tools and knowledge belonging firmly to the Bronze Age. But what if, beneath the sands, there were remnants of knowledge from a civilization far older, perhaps one that predated Egypt, one that could have been Atlantis or some forgotten progenitor culture erased from history? Rumors grew darker still when talk of star maps emerged. Several sources, ranging from mystics to engineers, claimed that among the objects recovered were inscribed plates or tablets depicting constellations, but not as they appear in the modern sky. Rather, these maps aligned with how the heavens would have looked tens of thousands of years ago, long before Egypt's known rise. If true, it would mean whoever carved these maps had either access to extraordinary astronomical knowledge or had lived in an age when the stars themselves were differently aligned. To reveal such knowledge publicly would not only fracture archaeology, but would raise an unthinkable question. Who were these people, and how did they see the stars with such accuracy? Then came tales of inscriptions unlike any hieroglyphs ever catalogued. Explorers who claimed to glimpse fragments spoke of symbols that pulsed with strange familiarity, yet defied translation, not Egyptian, not Sumerian, not belonging to any known script. Some believed they were proto-writing, evidence of a lost language that predated recorded history. Others suggested something more daring, that the symbols represented an entirely different system of knowledge, mathematical or even cosmic, designed not to record events, but to encode truths about the universe itself. The dread that accompanied these rumors stemmed not just from their content, but from their implications. If such artifacts existed, and if they were truly out of time, then our entire framework for understanding human history might collapse. Civilizations would no longer be viewed as isolated rises and falls, but as fragments of a deeper continuity, one in which knowledge was gained, lost, and buried, only to resurface in the shadows of monuments like the Sphinx. For the keepers of history, this would be unacceptable. The official timeline is not just academic, it is political, cultural, and deeply tied to national identity. To admit that something alien, whether in time, origin, or design, lay beneath Egypt's most iconic monument would shake the foundations of authority itself, and so denial became the weapon of choice. Archaeologists dismissed the claims, calling them inventions of fringe theorists. Government officials issued firm statements. Nothing unusual lies beneath the Sphinx. Yet every time a claim was silenced, another would arise. Witnesses swore to have seen unusual crates carried from the plateau under armed guard. Scholars who dared speculate on anomalous finds found their careers sidelined. One particularly persistent rumor told of a sealed metallic coffin-like structure, removed under cover of darkness, which bore no signs of corrosion despite its supposed age. Its whereabouts remain unknown. The connection to the cosmos deepens this mystery further. The Sphinx itself faces the rising sun, aligned with cycles that repeat across millennia. Some researchers have long suspected it was designed to mirror celestial patterns, perhaps linked to the constellation Leo, in an epoch long before dynastic Egypt. If artifacts truly exist that show ancient star maps, then the monument's alignment may not simply be symbolic, but part of a greater message. Could the builders have intended the Sphinx to serve as a sentinel, marking both terrestrial knowledge and its connection to the heavens? And if so, who were they building for? Their descendants or us? Stories of metallic spheres also circulate, in hushed tones. Said to be smooth, seamless, and impossibly balanced, these objects defy categorization. Some accounts describe them as hollow yet uncrushable, others as resonant when struck, producing deep tones that reverberated like bells. To some, they were ritualistic, to others, technological. If such spheres truly existed, were they remnants of tools, power sources, or instruments of a science long forgotten? Or were they symbolic offerings, their true purpose forever hidden? The sense of awe that surrounds these accounts is matched only by the dread of their suppression. For every whisper of discovery, there is a shadow of erasure, missing reports, vanished photographs, silence from those who might confirm. It is as though a hand reaches through history to smother any flame of forbidden knowledge before it can burn too brightly. Yet, paradoxically, such suppression only fuels the imagination. What could be so world-shattering that it must remain hidden? Perhaps the greatest irony lies in the fact that the objects themselves, if they exist, may not even be understood by us. To uncover an artifact out of time is not the same as comprehending it. Imagine a metallic box with no hinges, no seams, impervious to modern tools. Imagine star charts carved in a geometry we only partially recognize. Imagine inscriptions whose meanings remain locked, their codes unbroken. These would not be answers but questions, eternal riddles reminding us of our limits, humbling our certainty in progress. As the sands shift, burying and unveiling, we are left with fragments of testimony, rumor, and shadow. But one thread ties them all together, the refusal of silence to endure. For no matter how many times officials deny, no matter how carefully artifacts vanish, stories return, resurfacing like the desert wind, carrying grains of truth too sharp to ignore. The flow of the mystery now bends toward the stars. If the Sphinx, the pyramids, and these supposed objects out of time are all aligned with the heavens, then perhaps their message is not only historical, but cosmic. Perhaps the true danger of these artifacts lies not in what they tell us about our past, but in what they reveal about our place in the universe. If ancient civilizations were once guided by knowledge greater than our own, knowledge written in stone, metal, and starlight, then history is not a linear ascent, but a cycle of remembrance and forgetting. And the Sphinx, silent yet eternal, stands at the heart of that cycle, guarding secrets that time itself has not managed to erase. The section closes on a haunting image, a desert night, the Sphinx gazing eastward, its eyes fixed not on the sands, but on the stars. Somewhere beneath its paws, perhaps, lie relics that do not belong to any known time, metallic boxes that gleam in the dark, star maps of skies long forgotten, inscriptions that refuse to be read. They may never surface. They may already be hidden, far away, but their whispers endure, and those whispers, like echoes across eternity, demand that we ask the unthinkable. What if the greatest discoveries beneath the Sphinx are not of Egypt at all, but of a history we have not yet begun to remember? When the first rays of dawn stretch across the Giza plateau, the Sphinx gazes directly into the rising sun. This simple act of alignment, carved into immovable stone, is often dismissed as symbolic homage to Ra, the great solar deity of ancient Egypt. Yet, for those who dare to look deeper, the positioning of the Sphinx is far more than religious symbolism. It is an astronomical marker, a timeless witness to the dance of the heavens. The Sphinx is not merely a monument to a forgotten king. It is a cosmic instrument, an earthly mirror to the constellations above. To walk in its shadow is to feel the weight of a mystery that stretches beyond dynasties and into the very architecture of the sky. The ancients were not strangers to the heavens. Farmers planted by the Nile's flood, guided by the reappearance of Sirius. Priests timed their rituals by celestial events, but the Sphinx, in its colossal silence, points not merely to agricultural necessity, but to an epical truth. Scholars of archaeoastronomy argue that its gaze eastward is not fixed on the sun of our time, but on a far older moment when the constellation Leo rose with the dawn. Imagine the desert of 10 or 12,000 years ago, when the night sky mirrored a cosmic lion above the earthly lion carved in stone. Could the builders have encoded not only their devotion to the heavens, but also a record of time itself, a star map written in architecture? This alignment between the Sphinx and Leo is not coincidental, say those who read the monument as more than stone. Around 10,500 BCE, in the age known as the precession of the equinoxes, the spring sun rose in direct alignment with Leo. The Sphinx, facing the horizon, greeted not just the morning light, but its stellar counterpart. A lion of earth and a lion of stars, gazing upon each other across the dawn. This epoch is far earlier than conventional Egyptology permits. It suggests the monument, or at least the idea behind it, may have roots in a time when no dynasty was yet recorded, when human hands were still carving their first myths into cave walls. The implications of this alignment are staggering. If true, the Sphinx is not merely 4,500 years old, as textbooks assert, but perhaps twice or even 3 times that age. It may be a relic from a forgotten civilization, one whose knowledge of the heavens surpassed even that of dynastic priests. More unsettling still, the alignment could serve as a deliberate marker, a pointer through time, a cosmic calendar carved into the very bedrock of Egypt. What message did the builders hope? To leave frozen in stone? That they had mastered the heavens? That they wished to guide us thousands of years later toward something hidden beneath the sands? Forbidden whispers suggest precisely this. Some researchers argue that the Sphinx, the pyramids, and their alignments form part of an immense star map, one that encodes knowledge of the universe in geometric stone. The 3 great pyramids at Giza, famously, mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Extend the lines, and you see a celestial pattern etched across the desert floor. The Sphinx, aligned with Leo, becomes the guardian of this cosmic diagram, the earthly anchor of a knowledge system that binds heaven and earth. To the untrained eye, it is nothing more than coincidence. But to those who study precession, alignments, and the celestial cycles that repeat over tens of thousands of years, the Sphinx becomes a key, a star-locked gate pointing the way to truths buried beneath both stone and time. To gaze upon this alignment is to feel something uncanny, the sense that the monument itself remembers. It has endured wind, rain, sand, and empire, yet its gaze has never faltered. Each morning it greets the sun as though fulfilling a duty beyond mortal lifespans. Was it placed here not simply as art or reverence, but as testimony? The ancients knew that stone could outlast memory. If they wished to speak across millennia, they would not write upon papyrus which burns and crumbles. They would write in stone, anchoring their message to the stars, for the stars, too, endure. Together, stone and sky form the most eternal of texts, one that no censor or conqueror can fully erase. This brings us to the most dangerous of ideas, that beneath the Sphinx, in its rumored chambers, lies a record, a library, not of papyrus scrolls, but of star knowledge. Legends of the Hall of Records speak of texts inscribed with cosmic wisdom, hidden away until humanity is ready. To the orthodox scholar, these are myths, born of esoteric imagination, but if the alignments are intentional, then the myth grows, teeth. Perhaps the builders not only encoded the stars above, but left physical evidence of that knowledge below, buried to protect it from time and tyranny alike. Could the Sphinx itself be both marker and guardian, pointing the way with its gaze while shielding its treasure with stone? Such ideas veer dangerously close to heresy within academia. To admit that the Sphinx encodes archaeoastronomy is to admit that prehistoric civilizations possessed knowledge far greater than accepted. It would mean that humanity's intellectual ascent has not been a slow climb but a cycle of brilliance, collapse, and rediscovery. The very thought unsettles the foundations of history. And so, the idea is labeled forbidden knowledge, relegated to the margins, whispered in books that never reach university shelves. Yet the whispers persist, and with each new alignment discovered, the weight of silence grows heavier. Consider the geometry. The Sphinx faces due east, marking the equinoxes, when day and night are balanced. Its orientation is too precise to be mere chance. When paired with the pyramid's celestial mirroring, the entire Giza complex becomes a cosmic diagram. It is not merely a necropolis, as textbooks claim, but a celestial machine, a bridge between earth and sky. In this light, the Sphinx is not just a guardian of tombs, but a guardian of knowledge, its leonine body crouched over secrets that point beyond the horizon. In the cosmic rhythm of precession, constellations shift their positions over thousands of years. What rises in Leo today will not be the same in another age. To lock the Sphinx into alignment with Leo, therefore, is to lock it into a specific epoch, a date written in the heavens. It is as though the builders wished to point us back to that moment, saying, here is where it began. Here is when. The truth was known. Why mark 10,500 BCE? Was it the dawn of their civilization? Or was it the twilight of one even older, its wisdom preserved in stone before it faded into legend? The cosmic resonance does not end with Leo and Orion. Some argue that the Giza Plateau mirrors the Milky Way itself, with the Nile as its earthly counterpart. If so, then the Sphinx is not merely aligned with a constellation, but integrated into a grander celestial map. The entire landscape becomes a cosmic manuscript, written not in ink but in geology. To stand upon the plateau is to walk upon a page of the heavens, a forbidden text that scholars dare not fully translate. For those who dare contemplate these alignments, the question of intent becomes unavoidable. Did the builders seek only to glorify their gods, or did they hope to preserve something more enduring? A warning, perhaps, or a memory of catastrophe? Many cultures speak of floods, fires, and cycles of destruction. If the Sphinx truly points to 10,500 BCE, might it also point to a forgotten cataclysm, a turning of the cosmic wheel that destroyed an earlier world? If so, then its alignment is not merely commemorative, but prophetic. It is both a monument to survival and a warning of recurrence. Here the line between archaeology and myth blurs. The forbidden nature of this knowledge is not just academic gatekeeping, it is existential. To accept the Sphinx as a star map is to accept that history is far older, far more cyclical, and far more precarious than we are taught. It suggests that civilizations rise and fall not by accident but by rhythm, their fates woven into the stars. And if this is so, then our own age may not be immune. The Sphinx, silent and patient, may be watching to see whether we too will vanish into sand and shadow. To look upon the Sphinx at dawn is to feel the weight of eternity. The first light crowns its head, illuminating stone that has endured for untold ages. Behind it, the pyramids rise like frozen stars, their alignment echoing Orion's belt. Above, the heavens continue their slow turning, precession shifting the constellations in an endless dance. And in that moment, one feels the presence of a message, not spoken, not written, but inscribed in the very structure of earth and sky. The stars point the way, but to where? To what? The answer remains buried, forbidden, waiting. And so, we are left with a paradox. The Sphinx is both open and closed, both revealing and concealing. It points the way to the stars, yet guards its secrets beneath stone. It encodes a cosmic epoch, yet denies us certainty. It is at once an astronomical calendar, a guardian of memory, and a riddle that endures beyond time. Perhaps this is its true power, not to give us answers, but to compel us to seek them, to make us look not only at the desert and the stone, but upward, to the eternal night sky where lions of stars still roam. In the end, the forbidden nature of this knowledge is not imposed from without, but from within. We fear what it means if the Sphinx is older, if the stars it points to are markers of forgotten worlds. We fear that history is not what we think. It is, and so we turn away, preferring safe certainties to dangerous truths. Yet the Sphinx remains, its gaze fixed, its silence unbroken. The stars continue their course, patient as ever, and the question lingers, eternal as stone. What do the stars want us to remember? The Sphinx, crouched in eternal vigil on the sands of Giza, is often introduced as a monument, an architectural marvel, a sculpted lion with the face of a king. Yet for thousands of years, whispers have persisted that it is more than mere stone. Its posture is not idle but watchful, its expression not blank but secretive. For those who read its silence, the Sphinx appears less as a statue and more as a sentinel, the guardian of forbidden knowledge. It has endured millennia not to inspire awe alone, but to conceal truths too dangerous or too transformative for ordinary mortals to hold. The ancient builders may have designed it as a shield, a warning and a key all at once, hiding beneath its pores the remnants of civilizations long erased from history. Legends from across the world echo this interpretation. In Egyptian lore, the Sphinx is both riddle and guardian, barring access to sacred spaces until wisdom is proven. In Greek myth, it devours those who fail its test. Even in later Arab traditions, it is referred to as Abu al-Hawl, the father of terror, suggesting a presence not merely majestic but deeply unsettling. The universality of this symbolism raises a question: why does the Sphinx, in every culture, remain linked to secrecy and danger? Perhaps because it embodies more than art. It embodies the guardianship of truths that civilizations were not ready to confront. The most haunting of these whispers concerns the so-called Hall of Records, a legendary chamber said to be buried beneath the Sphinx's pores or deep within the bedrock beneath its body. This mythical archive, according to esoteric traditions, contains the wisdom of the ancients, star maps, histories of forgotten ages, and technologies so advanced they blur the line between myth and science. For some, this Hall of Records belongs to Atlantis, the fabled civilization described by Plato. If Atlantis fell beneath the waves, its survivors may have hidden their knowledge in Egypt, encoding it within the monumental form of the Sphinx. In this reading, the Sphinx becomes not just an Egyptian creation, but a hybrid inheritance, a sentinel left behind to guard the memory of a world lost to cataclysm. The danger of such knowledge is as important as its promise. To uncover the Hall of Records would not simply mean discovering forgotten scrolls or tablets. It would mean shattering our timeline of human history. If evidence emerged that an advanced civilization thrived thousands of years before Egypt's Old Kingdom, our understanding of human development would collapse. The rise of cities, agriculture, mathematics, and astronomy would no longer belong to the neat sequence in textbooks. Instead, it would suggest that humanity once reached great heights, only to fall into darkness, and that we live now in the shadow of a forgotten golden age. The Sphinx in this vision is the barrier that ensures this revelation does not arrive before its time. Explorations around the Sphinx have occasionally fueled these theories. In the late 20th century, seismic surveys beneath its pores revealed anomalies, voids or chambers hidden within the bedrock. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed them as natural features, yet the possibility of man-made cavities persists. Rumors claim that early excavators, particularly those connected to secret societies like the Freemasons, sought these chambers not for archaeology, but for initiation into arcane wisdom. The suggestion is mythic and haunting, that beneath the Sphinx lies a library, and that those who find it may gain knowledge once wielded by gods, kings, or beings older than history itself. The myth of Atlantis intertwines with these ideas like shadow and flame. Plato's account describes a civilization that fell due to arrogance, swallowed by floods after angering the gods. To imagine that the Sphinx guards Atlantean knowledge is to see it not just as stone, but as a tomb of memory, holding the remnants of a world destroyed. Perhaps the Sphinx was meant not to share this wisdom, but to protect the living from repeating Atlantis's fate. Knowledge of lost technologies, harnessing energies we barely comprehend, mastering architecture that defies time, could empower us, but it could also destroy us. If humanity is still too reckless, then the Sphinx's silence is mercy. Beyond Atlantis, other theories speak of pre-dynastic civilizations, cultures erased by the sands of time, their traces buried or destroyed. Some propose that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx, particularly the water weathering evident on its body, suggest it was carved in a far wetter climate, perhaps over 10,000 years ago. If true, this would place its origin long before the first pharaohs, in an age when mainstream history insists Egypt was little more than scattered tribes along the Nile. Who then carved it? Who possessed the skill, the vision, and the cosmic knowledge to place such a guardian in the desert? The builders may have belonged to a civilization unknown to history, one that left only fragments behind, fragments the Sphinx alone protects. The haunting element of this theory lies in its implications that history is not linear but cyclical. Civilizations rise, achieve brilliance, and collapse, leaving behind only enigmatic relics. The Sphinx may be one such relic, not built for the Egyptians of Khafra's time, but inherited by them, adopted into their pantheon without full knowledge of its origin. Its true builders may have vanished, their wisdom deliberately concealed until some distant age. If this is so, then the Sphinx is less a work of Egyptian piety and more a time capsule, preserving forbidden truths for a humanity still groping in the dark. Those who dare to imagine what lies in the hidden chambers conjure visions both wondrous and terrifying. Some speak of crystal libraries, where information is stored in ways our technology has not yet rediscovered. Others describe machines that harness sound, vibration, or light, technologies that seem magical to us, but may have been practical to those who mastered them. Still others whisper of records describing the true nature of the cosmos, not just astronomy, but the secrets of consciousness, energy, and the cycles of time itself. In such visions, the Sphinx is not merely a guardian, but a warning. Its riddle, unasked, its answer too dangerous for premature discovery. Why then does the thought of unveiling these secrets inspire both fascination and dread? Perhaps because knowledge is never neutral. To rediscover the wisdom of the ancients might elevate humanity to heights unimagined, but it might also repeat the hubris that destroyed Atlantis, or whatever civilization preceded us. Fire warms, but fire also burns. Knowledge empowers, but knowledge also destroys. The builders of the Sphinx may have understood this duality and embedded it into stone, the lion crouching as protector, its face serene yet implacable, daring only the worthy to pass. There is, too, the haunting suggestion that the Sphinx itself might be alive, not in flesh but in purpose. To imagine it as a guardian is to imagine intent. Did its creators bind it to a task, an eternal watch, like a sentinel left behind by gods or ancestors? Its silence becomes not absence but resistance, its stillness a choice. The Sphinx reveals nothing easily because its entire essence is guardianship. Perhaps the secret is not in the chamber, but in the act of seeking itself. Those who approach the Sphinx with arrogance will find only sand and stone, but those who approach with humility may discover truths not in chambers, but in the alignment of heaven and earth it so carefully preserves. What does it mean, then, that modern humanity, with its machinery and greed, digs so eagerly at its base? Is our search an act of reverence or an act of violation? If the Sphinx guards forbidden truths, then perhaps the danger lies not in what it hides, but in us, our inability to wield such knowledge responsibly. The danger is not that the Sphinx will release catastrophe, but that we will. In this light, the Sphinx's silence is not a riddle unsolved, but a mercy unbroken. And yet, the human spirit cannot resist the allure of the forbidden. We are creatures of curiosity, drawn to mysteries even when warned away. To stare into the unblinking eyes of the Sphinx is to feel that pull, the need to know what it knows, to read the record it guards, to reclaim the wisdom of the ancients. We whisper to ourselves that knowledge is always good, that discovery is always progress. But deep within we know that some truths are double-edged. The guardianship of the Sphinx may be a warning that the cost of revelation is higher than we are willing to pay. The mythic quality of this idea lingers long after one leaves the plateau. In dreams, the Sphinx appears not as stone, but as presence, silent, vast, and eternal. It waits in the darkness of the subconscious, as though testing us, weighing whether we are ready. Its riddle is unspoken, yet its challenge is clear. Prove yourselves worthy, or be devoured by the very knowledge you crave. The haunting tone of this guardianship lies in its ambiguity. Perhaps there is no treasure beneath it at all. Perhaps the Sphinx guards not a hall of records, but the very idea of forbidden knowledge itself. Its secret is that we are not ready. And so, the Sphinx remains. Centuries pass, empires rise and fall, sand buries and uncovers, yet it does not yield. It watches, patient, implacable, the ultimate guardian. Whether it protects Atlantean libraries, pre-dynastic technologies, or nothing but the riddle of time, it does so with perfect silence. And in that silence it teaches us the most haunting lesson of all, that knowledge is not always ours to demand, and that some truths, once uncovered, cannot be returned to the shadows. For decades, the mystery of the Great Sphinx has been framed as an archaeological debate, a cultural treasure, a silent riddle carved in stone. But beneath the polite language of academia and the tourist brochures lies another narrative, one darker, more unsettling, and far more secretive. It is the narrative whispered in restricted archives, muttered by researchers who later fell silent, and hinted at in the strange overlap between archaeology and military authority. What could possibly lie beneath the pores of the Sphinx, or within, the bedrock beneath the plateau, that would warrant not just study but classification? Why do both Egyptian and US authorities, usually so quick to compete or dispute, appear in this matter to cooperate? The answer lingers in the shadows, perhaps because what has been found or suspected was deemed too dangerous, too transformative, to ever be made public. The Sphinx may be the guardian of forbidden knowledge, but today it is governments and militaries who enforce its silence. The story begins innocently enough, with seismic surveys conducted in the late 20th century. Teams of geologists and archaeologists, using ground-penetrating technology, detected anomalies beneath the Sphinx's pores, voids, cavities, or chambers that did not match natural formations. These results should have been cause for celebration, an open call for excavation. Yet instead of a transparent investigation, reports emerged of permissions denied, research halted, and findings abruptly retracted. In their place came rumors of restricted digs conducted under military oversight, cordoned off from the public, and even from many within the academic community. From that moment, the Sphinx's mystery was no longer solely about ancient stone. It had entered the realm of classified secrecy. One cannot ignore the role of Egyptian authorities in this silence. For Egypt, the Sphinx is more than a monument. It is a national symbol, a source of revenue through tourism, and a political icon, of continuity from pharaonic glory to modern identity. To admit that something hidden and unexplained lay beneath it would be to invite chaos. Conspiracy theories, foreign interventions, perhaps even challenges to national ownership of the site. Thus, Egyptian officials have often treated the plateau not merely as heritage, but as a tightly managed stage where every revelation must be carefully scripted. But Egypt is not alone in this guardianship. Time and again, US involvement appears in the shadows. Scientists with government funding, archaeological projects entangled with diplomatic strings, and military cooperation in securing the Giza Plateau at sensitive moments. What is so compelling about a chamber of stone that two nations separated by oceans align in secrecy? The testimonies that leak through are rarely straightforward. A former researcher recalls being asked to sign non-disclosure agreements before examining survey data. A journalist speaks of being denied access to excavation sites without explanation. An archaeologist, once eager to discuss his findings, later refuses to answer any further questions, as though warned. These are not the actions of a discipline devoted to transparency and discovery. They are the echoes of classification, of a truth discovered, then locked away. The pattern deepens when one examines the military's role. At various points in the 20th century, the Giza Plateau was cordoned off under the pretext of security. Soldiers stood guard, not merely against looters, but against wandering scholars and curious locals. Certain nights saw unusual activity. Equipment moved in, lights burning where no tourists were permitted, trenches dug and covered before dawn. Officially, nothing was found. Unofficially, whispers persist that chambers were entered, artifacts removed, and knowledge suppressed. The involvement of military forces raises a chilling question. If these chambers were empty, why such security? And if they were not empty, what was uncovered that demanded secrecy at the highest levels? Some point to the possibility of artifacts that rewrite history. Imagine, for instance, finding star maps thousands of years older than dynastic Egypt, or metallic objects forged with techniques far beyond the Bronze Age. To reveal such discoveries would shatter our accepted timeline of civilization, threatening not just academic careers, but entire structures of belief, power, and identity. In such a scenario, governments might prefer silence. Better to classify forever than to admit humanity's history is not what we believe. Others whisper of more dangerous finds, technologies that could be weaponized. If the builders of the Sphinx were heirs to a forgotten civilization, perhaps Atlantean, perhaps pre-dynastic, then what if their chambers contained devices, crystals, or machines that harnessed energies we do not yet understand? The 20th century was an era defined by the arms race, the nuclear secret, the quest for technological dominance. To stumble upon a machine that manipulates sound, light, or gravity would be to stumble upon power itself. In such a context, secrecy is not about archaeology, it is about control. It is about ensuring that whatever was hidden beneath the Sphinx serves the interests of states, not of people. The testimonies that surface hint at precisely this. One geologist who conducted surveys in the 1990s described data too anomalous to be ignored, only to see his access cut off. Another researcher claimed that the results of his work were taken, classified, and never returned. Documents disappear. Conferences avoid the subject. When questions arise, officials smile politely, dismissing them as fantasy. But the silence is itself suspicious. It is the silence of witnesses who have seen too much, the silence of professionals whose careers depend on obedience, the silence of a secret that is too large to acknowledge. Even the archives tell their own story. Requests for excavation reports are denied. Files vanish or are declared restricted. Photographs are censored with certain areas of the plateau left conveniently undocumented. In an age of digital transparency, where information flows freely across the globe, the absence of data is itself a kind of evidence. What we do not see, what we are not allowed to know, speaks louder than the official story. And yet, the silence cannot erase the human element, the individuals who carry the weight of what they glimpsed. Some leave academia altogether, retreating into obscurity. Others, years later, share fragments of their story in hushed tones, their words laced with fear. They describe artifacts whisked away in crates, chambers sealed with concrete, and meetings, where men in suits, not archaeologists, dictated the terms of discovery. The Sphinx's secrets were not lost to time. They were deliberately hidden by human hands. What then was so dangerous it had to be locked away forever? Was it proof that our history is older, stranger, and more complex than we dare admit? Was it evidence of a lost civilization whose knowledge could upend the present order? Or was it technology, real, tangible power, that governments feared in the wrong hands? Each possibility is terrifying in its own way, and in the absence of answers, suspicion grows. For every official denial, the mystery deepens. For every silenced witness, the legend of the classified chambers becomes more convincing. The irony is cruel. The Sphinx has stood for millennia as a riddle, its secret locked in stone. But in modern times, it is not the monument that guards the secret. It is us. It is governments, militaries, and institutions that have chosen classification over revelation, silence over truth. Perhaps they believe they are protecting us. Perhaps they believe we are not ready. Or perhaps they fear what knowledge does. It destabilizes, it liberates, it undermines authority. To reveal the truth of the Sphinx might empower humanity in ways that no government could control, and so the Sphinx remains classified forever. Its chambers, if they exist, are sealed. Its artifacts, if they were found, are hidden. Its story, if it was told, is buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. The guardianship of forbidden knowledge has shifted from ancient stone to modern secrecy. But the effect is the same. The truth waits, patient, unyielding, just out of reach. For those who listen closely, the silence of witnesses speaks volumes. It is the silence of fear, of pressure, of warnings whispered behind closed doors. It is the silence of truths that could change everything. Truths that remain just beyond our grasp. And in that silence lies the haunting realization that perhaps the Sphinx will never yield its secret. Not because time has erased it, but because we have chosen to bury it deeper than any chamber of stone. There is a particular kind of silence that feels heavier than words, heavier even than the stones of the Sphinx itself. It is not the silence of ignorance or the silence of mystery, but the silence of those who once tried to speak, and then could speak no more. In the long history of archaeology, discoveries are usually celebrated with academic papers, international conferences, and headlines proclaiming new truths about the past. Yet around the Sphinx, especially its hidden chambers, forbidden tunnels, and whispered anomalies, another pattern emerges: voices that briefly flicker and then vanish, careers that end abruptly, manuscripts that go missing, photographs that cannot be found. This is the silence of witnesses, and it lingers like a shadow across every attempt to understand what lies beneath the ancient guardian. The story begins with archaeologists and researchers who dared to suggest that the Sphinx was older than dynastic Egypt, or that it concealed spaces beneath its pores. They were not all dreamers or fringe theorists. Some were credentialed geologists, respected Egyptologists, or engineers armed with data. Yet again and again, when these individuals published their findings or granted interviews, their voices seemed to unravel in the aftermath. One had his funding cut, his projects abruptly cancelled. Another found his teaching position quietly terminated, his work ridiculed by colleagues who once praised him. What should have been a debate over evidence turned instead into an erasure of dissent. The official record moved on, but the witnesses were left behind. One of the most chilling stories concerns a researcher in the late 20th century who claimed to have photographed unusual inscriptions inside a blocked chamber during a private survey. He spoke of markings unlike dynastic hieroglyphs, symbols that seemed older, stranger, almost geometric in their arrangement. He showed these images to a handful of trusted colleagues, promising to publish them soon. But weeks later, when those colleagues inquired, the photographs were gone. He insisted his negatives had been stolen, his equipment tampered with, his drafts deleted. Shortly afterward, he withdrew from public life altogether. When contacted years later, he declined to speak of the matter, his voice carrying a kind, resigned exhaustion. The silence was not voluntary. It was imposed either by external pressure or by a weight he no longer wished to carry. Other witnesses tell their stories in fragments, whispered in corridors after lectures or scrawled in unpublished notes. One archaeologist recalled being present at a dig where crates were loaded under the watch of military personnel. The crates, he said, contained objects not of this period. Strange metallic fragments, fragments inscribed with constellations, items whisked away without explanation. When he tried to pursue the matter, he was told his work was no longer needed. His name faded from publications. He died years later, his notes never recovered. The silence grew deeper. Sometimes the silencing is more subtle. A graduate student in the early 2000s devoted her thesis to the alignment of the Sphinx with astronomical cycles, drawing on archaeoastronomy to suggest a deliberate link between the monument and the constellation Leo during an epoch far older than accepted. Her work was meticulous, her arguments carefully drawn. Yet her thesis committee rejected the work outright, not for lack of rigor, but for overstepping disciplinary bounds. The rejection effectively ended her academic career. She left the field, her findings lost to a desk drawer. In her place remained silence, an absence of voices in an arena where dissent is not tolerated. Manuscripts vanish in stranger ways. More than one researcher has claimed to have written extensive drafts, exploring anomalies beneath the Giza Plateau, only to see their work lost under inexplicable circumstances. Computers crashing, files corrupted, even printed copies gone missing from locked offices. To the skeptic, these are coincidences, the mundane accidents of life. But to those who have watched this pattern repeat again and again across decades, the coincidences feel too deliberate. As if some unseen hand ensures that certain truths are never allowed to fully surface. Missing photographs deepen the unease. Visitors to the Sphinx in the mid-20th century spoke of taking images of unusual stone cuts, fissures that seemed to lead into blocked passageways. Yet when they developed their film, certain frames were inexplicably blank. Photographers accustomed to precision insisted they had made no mistake. More recently, digital files of scans and surveys have gone missing from archives or have been replaced by clean versions that omit anomalies once visible. It is as though the Sphinx itself erases its own evidence, or rather, as though someone ensures that the Sphinx remains mute. Behind these silences lies the human toll. Archaeology, at its best, is a vocation driven by wonder, a hunger to uncover the past, to tell the story of humanity. For those who brush against forbidden truths, that wonder becomes a burden. They carry fragments of knowledge too large for them to hold alone, fragments they cannot share. Some become reclusive, retreating from colleagues and public life. Others descend into paranoia, convinced they are watched or monitored. A few attempt to speak, only to be drowned in ridicule, labeled as pseudo-scholars or dreamers. The silence is not only external, it becomes internal, a despair that gnaws at those who once glimpsed something extraordinary and then were forced to bury it in their own minds. The testimonies that surface are therefore tinged with grief. A retired archaeologist once confessed in a private letter that he had walked through a chamber beneath the plateau, a chamber lined with smooth stone blocks, unlike any known from dynastic Egypt. He described the air as cool and dry, the atmosphere as heavy with presence, but he never published this account. He left it hidden among his personal papers, discovered only after his death. Why? Perhaps because he knew the cost of speaking aloud. His silence was the silence of protection, protecting himself, protecting his family, perhaps even protecting truths too dangerous to reveal. The somber thread in all these stories is the realization that silence itself has become part of the Sphinx's riddle, where once we asked, what lies beneath? We now ask, why can no one speak? The missing manuscripts, the erased photographs, the broken careers, these form their own kind of evidence, an evidence of suppression rather than discovery. It suggests that the chambers and artifacts, whether real or imagined, carry a significance that threatens the very structure of knowledge and power. If harmless, they would be shared. If trivial, they would be ignored. But instead they are classified, erased, silenced. There is a mournful quality to this realization. Humanity has always reached for its past, seeking to know where it came from, what stories shaped its existence. Yet here, at one of the greatest monuments of antiquity, that quest is thwarted, not by time, not by erosion, but by deliberate silence. The witnesses are still alive, scattered, carrying their secrets in silence. Some remain broken by the burden of what they glimpsed. Others perhaps find peace in forgetting, but the world remains poorer for their absence, and so we are left with the ultimate haunting possibility. What if the truth was never meant to be found? What if the Sphinx was not merely a guardian of knowledge, but also a warning, a monument constructed not to reveal, but to conceal? If so, then the silence of witnesses is not an accident of history, but part of the design. Their broken voices, their lost manuscripts, their missing images, these are the echoes of a truth buried not only in stone, but in the human soul. The silence becomes a monument of its own, as enduring as the Sphinx itself, a testament to the idea that some knowledge lies forever out of reach. In the end, the witnesses fade into history like shadows at dusk, their words lost to time, their truths swallowed by silence. What they saw, if they saw anything at all, remains unspoken, unconfirmed, and yet deeply felt. And perhaps that is the most haunting riddle of all. Not that the Sphinx conceals secrets, but that humanity has learned to silence itself, to turn away from what it cannot bear to face. The silence of the witnesses is the silence of the world itself, standing before the riddle of ages and choosing not to speak. Beneath the eternal gaze of the Sphinx, legends gather like drifting sands, never still, never gone, whispering to those who listen that stone may be silent, but memory is not. And in Section 13, the realm of dreams of Atlantis, we descend into a dreamlike current where prophecy, esoteric teachings, and the yearning of civilizations converge upon the possibility that Egypt, mighty and ancient though it is, was itself an inheritor of something far older, a knowledge whispered through ruins guarded by the Leonine monument, whose eyes stare across millennia. Here the name of Edgar Cayce hovers like a flame in the desert night, for it was Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who declared that beneath the Sphinx lies a hall of records, not merely of dynastic kings or the annals of pharaohs, but of humanity itself, a library of forgotten ages, said to contain the wisdom of Atlantis, the mythical civilization swallowed by waves, its memory persisting across cultures and continents like a ghost that refuses to fade. Kayse's visions placed this hall between the paws of the Sphinx, a chamber sealed until the world was ready, and though scholars scoffed and archaeologists bristled, countless seekers allowed themselves to dream, for the imagery was too rich, too haunting to dismiss, the idea that beneath the desert sleeps not sand and rock but humanity's missing story. To contemplate Atlantis is to drift through a fog where myth bleeds into memory. Plato in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias spoke of a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, rich in wisdom and power, its people descended from divine, origins its fall swift and violent when pride overcame harmony, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Skeptics treat his tale as allegory, but others insist it was history wrapped in philosophy, a warning disguised as narrative, and from Plato to Kayse to modern mystics, the thread remains. What if Atlantis was not only real, but the progenitor of Egypt itself? The pyramids, the Sphinx, the uncanny precision of alignments with Orion and Leo, did these not echo a knowledge predating Nile dynasties? Esoteric traditions across the centuries echo in unison. Hermetic texts speak of Thoth, the wisdom bringer, sometimes linked with the Atlantean priest-king who carried sacred knowledge to Egypt. Legends say he inscribed his wisdom on emerald tablets and sealed them for future generations, perhaps in chambers where only guardians of stone could protect them. When Kayse spoke of the Hall of Records, he was not merely predicting a library of scrolls, but a treasury of cosmic memory, a star map of humanity's rise and fall, a record of technologies lost, of harmonies between earth and sky now broken by the forgetfulness of time. The dreamlike tone lingers here, for it is not only about what may lie beneath, but about what it means to believe. Why does the human heart long so deeply for Atlantis, for an origin before origins? Is it because within us lies a sense of something forgotten, some fracture in our story that modern history cannot mend? If the Sphinx guards this secret, then perhaps its silence is deliberate, a lesson written not in words, but in mystery. Yet to dream of Atlantis beneath the paws of the Sphinx is also to confront the resistance of the waking world. Egyptologists dismiss such notions as fantasy, claiming no evidence supports Kayse's visions, and yet the radar scans, the seismic anomalies, the whispers of forbidden digs persist, suggesting that something is there, something deliberately avoided, something inconvenient to the sanctioned narrative. The dream deepens when one considers the implications. What if the Atlanteans, as Kayse suggested, were not merely human, but a people closer to the stars, capable of blending spirit and matter in ways lost to us? What if the geometry of the pyramids and the astronomical alignments are echoes of their science, surviving not as myth but as blueprint? In this section, the tone is mystical, expansive, as though the desert itself is a dreamscape, and we are invited to walk between stars and dunes, between memory and imagination, pondering whether the Sphinx was raised by Egyptians honoring their gods or by survivors honoring their lost world. Accounts from esoteric circles speak of initiates who dreamed vividly of vast underground halls lined with crystalline tablets, of metallic spheres humming with energy, of maps etched with constellations not yet born into human astronomy. They tell of dreams where torches burned without fire, where music resonated through stone, guiding the seeker deeper into chambers where the weight of forgotten epochs pressed upon the soul. Were these dreams merely subconscious yearnings, or flickers of a collective memory that has survived through myth? The dream of Atlantis is not only about the past, but also about the present, about the censorship of wonder. Why is it that when anomalies are found beneath the Sphinx, officials quickly close ranks, restricting information, sealing data? If nothing lies beneath, why the shadows of secrecy? Perhaps because the Hall of Records, if real, does not merely threaten archaeology, it threatens identity. For to admit a civilization older than Egypt, wiser than Greece, and global in scope, is to rewrite humanity's origin, to uproot the foundations of authority. Thus the dream is policed, classified, dismissed, but never extinguished. For like water pressing against stone, it seeps through cracks, carried by seekers, mystics, dreamers, who hear the call of the Sphinx not as a roar, but as a whisper that the sands still hide. And here lies the haunting beauty of Section 13. It is not about whether Atlantis is fact or fiction, but about the way it continues to live in us, in the tension between skepticism and belief, between rational dismissal and the irresistible allure of mystery. The Sphinx, stoic and timeless, embodies this paradox. It gives no answers, only silence, and yet its silence is fertile, birthing endless speculation, dreams that refuse to die. To imagine Atlantis beneath it is to imagine that history is not a straight line but a circle, that civilizations rise and fall and rise again. That knowledge is never lost but buried, waiting for us to be ready. And perhaps this is why Casey said the Hall of Records would only open when humanity reached a certain threshold of consciousness, because knowledge without wisdom destroys, but knowledge with humility transforms. As the desert winds sweep across the plateau, the dream of Atlantis lingers like a mirage, shimmering not only beneath the sands, but within the collective heart of humanity, preparing us, perhaps, for the possibility that the legacy of secrecy, which has long shrouded the Sphinx, was never about concealment alone, but about timing, about ensuring that when the doors finally open, we are not conquerors of knowledge, but caretakers of truth. Thus, Section 13 flows like a dream into silence, preparing us for the legacy of what has been hidden, what has been denied, and what may yet awaken when the Sphinx decides its guardianship is complete. Beneath the weight of millennia, the Sphinx has not only endured as a monument of stone, but also as a monument of silence, and in Section 14, the legacy of sand and silence, we step into a space where myth, power, and censorship collapse into one another, leaving us to reflect on the strange continuity that binds ancient secrecy to modern bureaucracy, as though across every age the Sphinx has served not simply as a guardian of stone, but as a mirror for the rulers of its time, reflecting their choices of what to reveal and what to bury. In the earliest epochs, when the desert was still young and dynasties struggled to assert their divinity, myths gathered around the Sphinx like fog, whispered in stories of lion-bodied gods and sun-born kings, a creature neither man nor beast, but both, poised to remind rulers of their fragility beneath the cosmos. And yet even then the power of silence was paramount. Temple inscriptions carefully omitted certain names, certain deeds, for the ancients too understood that control of memory was the purest form of authority. The sands themselves became allies in this governance, swallowing temples, burying inscriptions, hiding chambers, and what was concealed became as potent as what was displayed, for mystery exerts a pull greater than proclamation. Across centuries, rulers rose and fell, and each projected themselves upon the Sphinx, some restoring, some erasing, some claiming its gaze for themselves, but all using its silence as a canvas for their own narratives. Thutmose IV inscribed, "The dream Stele," presenting himself as chosen by the Sphinx, legitimizing his rule through divine encounter. Yet how many other stelae, how many other inscriptions were erased, buried, lost, so that one voice might dominate? Thus, from the very beginning, the Sphinx was both monument and instrument, its silence manipulated as a political tool. In later centuries, as Greeks and then Romans entered Egypt, the Sphinx transformed again, absorbed into new mythologies. Its silence recast as wisdom hidden from outsiders, a keeper of mysteries that could only be unveiled through initiation. And in these layers of appropriation, we see the persistence of a pattern. The Sphinx endures, the sands shift, rulers change, but the balance between revelation and concealment remains constant, a dance between power and silence. By the time Islam reached Egypt, and Arab chroniclers described the Sphinx as Abu al-Hol, the father of terror, its silence had taken on a darker aspect, a reminder not of divine kingship, but of forbidden knowledge. Something to be respected, feared and perhaps left untouched, and again we find the same duality, the urge to know and the equal urge to protect knowledge by burying it. The sands by then had already swallowed most of the Sphinx, leaving only its head visible, as though the desert itself conspired with time to keep its secrets hidden, and this burial became symbolic of a truth deeper than stone, that every age buries as much as it reveals. In the 19th and 20th centuries, when Western archaeologists and explorers began to dig the Sphinx out of the sands once more, the same legacy repeated, now dressed in the language of science and empire. Excavation was framed as revelation, yet archives were restricted, discoveries selectively published, narratives tightly controlled, and in this bureaucratic silence we find the modern echo of ancient censorship, a reminder that the Sphinx has always been as much about the control of knowledge as about the pursuit of it. The sand may have been removed, but the silence persisted, silence now shaped not by dunes but by academic institutions, state authorities, and international politics. For in a global age, the stakes of revelation had only grown larger. To admit anomalies, to reveal chambers, to acknowledge unexplained artifacts, would destabilize carefully constructed narratives of civilization. And so, once again, silence prevailed. This is the legacy of sand and silence, an unbroken thread of concealment that stretches from pharaohs to presidents, from temple scribes to government officials, all united in the instinct to bury what cannot be controlled. The Sphinx, stoic and mute, stands as the perfect accomplice in this legacy. Its unchanging gaze offers no contradiction, no confirmation, only the haunting ambiguity that allows power to project upon it whatever truth is convenient. It has been at times a guardian of gods, a symbol of kingship, a demonic idol, an object of colonial fascination, and now, in modern narratives, a battleground between mainstream archaeology and alternative seekers. But through it all, its silence has remained unbroken, the one constant that allows each age to interpret and to censor as it pleases. The sands themselves symbolize this cycle. They bury, they uncover, they shift with the wind, revealing fragments while hiding others, and thus the desert becomes not only a setting, but a participant in this ongoing drama, complicit in the legacy of concealment. To study the Sphinx, then, is not merely to study a monument, it is to study the psychology of power, the way civilizations across time choose to shape memory, to protect or to manipulate truth, to silence voices that do not fit the desired story. What myths were suppressed by pharaohs? What reports silenced by colonial expeditions? What anomalies buried by modern authorities? The pattern is the same, and the Sphinx, eternal and impassive, becomes the emblem of this pattern, the ultimate mirror, reflecting the silence of those who fear what revelation might unleash. And so, as we prepare to step toward the climactic finale, we are left with a heavy truth, that the Sphinx is less a monument of answers than a monument of questions, a silent witness not only to the passage of time, but to the deliberate choices of those who govern history, those who decide which truths are fit to be told, and which must remain buried beneath sand and silence. Beneath the unblinking gaze of the Sphinx, one comes to realize that its truest function has never been to reveal, but to endure. And in that endurance lies a paradox, a kind of final code that refuses to die. For every trench dug, every radar scan, every whispered excavation rumored in the night has produced not closure, but proliferation, multiplying questions rather than resolving them, as though the monument itself were constructed not merely of limestone and weathered fissures, but of mystery incarnate, a silence so profound that it resists every attempt at interpretation. This silence is not absence but presence, not emptiness but fullness, a reservoir into which centuries have poured their projections, hopes, and terrors. And in return, the Sphinx has offered nothing but the same eternal stare, the same mute endurance, a cipher that seems to grow stronger the more it is interrogated. Perhaps this is the essence of its code, that truth, when bound too tightly to human expectation, dissolves, leaving only the hunger for truth intact. And so the Sphinx sustains itself not by giving but by withholding, its power rooted in the way absence breeds curiosity more potently than presence ever could. So across epochs this dynamic repeats, ancient Egyptians whispering of gods hidden beneath stone, Greeks layering their myths upon its body, Arab chroniclers painting it as both guardian and terror, modern seekers chasing Casey's visions of Atlantean libraries, and academics dismissing anomalies only to inflame suspicion further. Each generation leaves convinced it has approached an answer, only to find itself staring once more into the abyss of silence. The code is not in hidden chambers, nor in star alignments, nor in the fragments of artifacts rumored to have been smuggled into secret archives. The code is in the silence itself, a silence that functions as a mirror, forcing humanity to confront its own need for meaning, its own inability to exist comfortably in the presence of the unknown. If one listens long enough, one can almost hear the pattern. The more we dig, the deeper the silence becomes, as though the Sphinx itself feeds on inquiry, growing stronger not through revelation, but through deferral. It becomes hypnotic when considered this way. The Sphinx not as monument, but as mechanism, a device engineered to generate endless wonder, to ensure that curiosity itself is never extinguished. For if all truths were revealed, if all chambers opened, if all artifacts displayed, the mystery would collapse into certainty, and certainty is brittle, destined to shatter, while wonder is eternal, self-renewing, indestructible. Thus, the code the Sphinx guards is not a set of ancient texts, nor the technology of forgotten civilizations, but the mystery of wonder itself, encoded into stone, encoded into silence, encoded into every human heart that looks upon it and asks, why? In this way, the Sphinx achieves what no library, no archive, no hall of records could, an immortality of questioning, a riddle that regenerates across millennia. And perhaps this was the intention all along, that those who carved it, whether pharaohs or precursors from lost civilizations, understood that the surest way to preserve wisdom is not to reveal it, not to explain it, but to enshrine it in a silence so enduring it would outlast empires, religions, and sciences alike. The Sphinx, then, is not a guardian of answers, but a guardian of questions, the ultimate paradox, a code whose function is not to be solved, but to ensure that solving never ends. Its silence is louder than speech, its endurance more eloquent than revelation, and in this hypnotic paradox humanity is bound, generation after generation approaching, probing, doubting, hoping, yet always leaving with more uncertainty than before. And this is why the code refuses to die, why every excavation leads to more speculation, why every denial from scholars only inflames further suspicion, why every myth lingers long after being dismissed, because the code is recursive. It thrives. On being questioned, it multiplies within every human imagination it touches, and thus it cannot be silenced, cannot be buried, cannot be erased, for it is not in the stone alone, but in the echo of human thought. As the winds sweep across the Giza plateau, as the sands shift and swallow and uncover again, the Sphinx endures in its role as the eternal riddle, the code that turns seekers into dreamers, skeptics into believers, believers into doubters, a cycle without end. Perhaps the greatest danger is not what lies beneath, nor what was removed, nor what remains classified in secret archives, but the realization that the Sphinx needs nothing hidden beneath it, for its silence is sufficient to generate endless mythology. The code is self-contained, perfect, impossible to crack, precisely because it was never meant to be cracked. And so humanity stands perpetually at its threshold, gazing into eyes that reveal nothing and everything, caught between awe and frustration, between reverence and suspicion, suspended in a state of eternal wonder. This, then, is the threshold we now approach. The code that refuses to die is not the Sphinx's secret, but ours, a reflection of our own eternal hunger for meaning, a hunger that no revelation could ever satisfy. In this recognition, the flow turns inexorably toward the conclusion, for the silence of the Sphinx has brought us here, not to closure, but to the realization that closure was never the point, that what endures, what the code ensures, is wonder itself, wonder that transcends time, transcends culture, and binds humanity forever to the riddle carved in stone beneath the desert sun. In the end, as we step back from the long corridors of speculation, the whispers of ancient myths, the guarded statements of scholars, the rumors of secret digs, the prophecies of mystics, and the coded silence of the Sphinx itself, we are left with a realization more profound than any singular discovery could provide, that the Sphinx endures not as an answer, but as a question. It is a monument of endurance and enigma, a sentinel whose power lies in what it refuses to disclose. Across centuries, it has drawn seekers into its orbit, pharaohs who revered it, Greeks who layered their myths upon it, Arab chroniclers who wove tales of hidden doors and chambers, Renaissance dreamers who sought lost wisdom, and modern researchers who scanned its foundations with the best of science. Yet in every age, the result has been the same. More questions than answers, more speculation than certainty, more hunger than satisfaction. And perhaps this, more than anything else, is the legacy the Sphinx has given us. That history itself may be less about what is preserved and more about what is withheld, less about revelation and more about mystery. For if we imagine for a moment that the great secrets truly do lie beneath, that somewhere in stone chambers are scrolls of Atlantean knowledge, or artifacts that predate dynastic Egypt, or cosmic star maps that prove humanity's forgotten past, what then? Would we accept such revelations, or would they tear apart the fragile narratives by which we anchor ourselves? The silence of scholars, the firm denials of archaeologists like Zahi Hawass, the shadow of military involvement, the classified reports whispered of in the 1990s, all of these may be read as a conspiracy of silence. But another possibility exists, that perhaps the silence is not merely suppression but preservation. For some truths once unveiled cannot be contained. Some knowledge once freed demands to be lived by, demands to be acted upon, and in this demand lies peril. The Sphinx, then, might not only guard knowledge, it may also guard us from knowledge, standing as both protector and warden, shielding humanity from truths it is not yet ready to bear. Yet this interpretation too dissolves into paradox, because humanity has always been restless, never content with mystery left untouched. We are a species defined by curiosity, by the refusal to leave the unanswered question alone. And so we circle back again and again, to Casey's prophecies of the Hall of Records, to the alignments of stars that echo in the monument's gaze, to radar anomalies beneath its pores, to testimonies of hidden chambers sealed forever. Each theory is both dismissed and reborn, disproven and reimagined, denied yet made more powerful in denial. The Sphinx does not silence these stories, it amplifies them. Its mute presence, its weathered face, its sheer survival against the desert. Winds all conspire to keep the mystery alive, and in doing so, it fulfills a role no less vital than that of guardian of stone. It becomes a guardian of wonder itself. What then does this tell us, not about Egypt, not about Atlantis, not about lost civilizations, but about ourselves? It reveals that wonder is essential to the human spirit, that secrecy, far from extinguishing curiosity, multiplies it. That silence, rather than ending speculation, fuels it endlessly. And that monuments like the Sphinx endure not only in limestone, but in imagination, standing less as artifacts of history than as catalysts of mystery. The Sphinx has no need to speak, because its silence speaks louder than revelation ever could. Every unanswered question is an invitation, every denial a challenge, every rumor a seed for the imagination. We come away not with closure, but with a heightened awareness of the vastness of the unknown, of the infinite expanse of what we do not yet know and may never know. And so as the desert night settles around the plateau, as stars wheel once more across the sky that ancient builders may have charted, as the Sphinx stares east toward the horizon where the sun will rise again tomorrow, the question returns. To us, as it has returned for thousands of years, what lies beneath? What truth sleeps in chambers unseen, or perhaps in no chambers at all, but only in our relentless drive to seek? The Sphinx offers no reply. It does not need to. Its silence has already shaped the course of human imagination for millennia, ensuring that long after the last grain of sand has shifted, long after modern civilizations have faded, as surely as the pharaohs once did, the mystery will remain. The Sphinx is eternal, not because it answers, but because it refuses. And in that refusal lies its gift, a reminder that wonder itself is timeless, indestructible, a code that no power, no empire, no scholar, and no seeker can ever fully erase. Thus we end where we began, not with revelation, but with awe. The Sphinx does not whisper the truth of Atlantis, nor of hidden archives, nor of forgotten technologies. It whispers something deeper, something more enduring. It whispers the eternal reminder that there are always mysteries beyond our reach, that every answer is only a doorway into deeper questions, and that the pursuit itself is what defines us. To stand before the Sphinx is to stand before ourselves, our hunger for meaning, our fear of the unknown, our unwillingness to let silence remain silence. It is to confront the paradox that the greatest secrets are those never revealed, and that the truest wisdom may lie not in answers, but in wonder. And so the Sphinx endures, not as a solved riddle, but as the riddle itself carved in stone, staring across eternity, carrying within its silence the one message that whispers through time: the mystery lives on.